Hey guys, tonight we're going way back, to a time when people still travelled by carriage, wore whalebone corsets for fun, and bathed like maybe once a week. Our story begins in 1819, with the birth of a baby girl who isn't supposed to matter much. She's just one royal among many in a chaotic family tree riddled with gout, scandal, and German dukes you've never heard of. But plot twist, she's going to end up ruling a quarter of the earth. Yep, this is the start of Queen Victoria's story. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Like, even if you were rich, you'd still have a decent chance of dying from a mild cough. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and time in the comments. I want to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So you're born in May of 1819 at Kensington Palace in London. You're not even the first royal baby of the year. In fact, you're part of a weird little royal baby race. See, King George III is still alive, but he's very, very old and mostly out of it. His sons, none of whom have managed to produce a legitimate heir, suddenly realise they should probably stop chasing actresses and start producing some actual dynastic material. It's like a very awkward episode of The Bachelor, but everyone's in military uniforms and ruffled collars. Your father, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, is the fourth son. He's not exactly famous for ambition, until now. He marries Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, a German widow with 2 kids already. You're born exactly 9 months later, like clockwork. And just like that, you're the backup heir. Not important enough to be fussed over, but close enough to keep an eye on. Except then the line of succession starts collapsing like badly stacked dominoes. Your father dies when you're just 8 months old. Then the other royal uncles, some of them without children, others with only illegitimate kids, start dying too. By the time you're a toddler, it's becoming weirdly likely that you, the small girl with enormous eyes and an even bigger name, Alexandrina Victoria if you're fancy, might be next in line. And you have no idea because you're just a kid in a gloomy palace with creaky floors and way too many adult rules. Kensington Palace isn't glamorous. It's more like a half-dead government building with drafty corridors. But for you, it's the whole world. You're not allowed to walk down a hall alone. You share a bedroom with your mother. You can't have friends unless they're approved by your governess. It's all part of the Kensington system, a set of strict guidelines crafted by your mother and her very helpful advisor, Sir John Conroy. The goal? Total control. They don't want you forming independent thoughts. They want a pliable little princess who'll let them keep power once she's queen. And honestly, it almost works. You grow up lonely, emotionally smothered, and absolutely dependent on the small circle of adults around you. But there's a spark. Even as a child, you're observant and stubborn. You start noticing things, like how Conroy treats your mother like a puppet, or how the other children in your extended family have freedoms you don't. You begin writing in your diary, the thing that becomes your lifelong habit and secret weapon, and you start fantasizing about the day when you won't need permission to take a walk or speak your mind. Meanwhile, over in the rest of the world, things are getting complicated. The British Empire is already sprawling. It has chunks of the Caribbean, big slices of India, and influence basically everywhere that produces sugar, spices, or tea. But it's also a mess of contradictions. Britain's becoming the factory of the world, thanks to a little something called the Industrial Revolution, but it's also struggling with poverty, labour riots, and all the side effects of extreme capitalism. Slavery is still legal in parts of the empire. Children work 12-hour shifts in textile mills. Cholera is just like a thing, and yet somehow your tiny, chaotic island keeps gaining global power. Then, on June 20th, 1837, it happens. You're 18. You're woken up at 6 a.m. by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain. Dramatic, right? They tell you the king, your uncle William the Feoster, is dead. You are now Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. You blink, sit up, and quietly say, "I will be good," which is very on brand for you, but inside, you're probably screaming. This is the moment history pivots. One moment you're a tightly monitored teenager. The next, you're the sovereign of an empire with colonies on nearly every continent, a population of over 200 million, and no real clue what you're doing. but you're so ready to not be bossed around anymore. You move out of Kensington Palace immediately, like that day. You set up shop in Buckingham Palace, a much newer and draftier place that smells like fresh paint and ambition. Conroy is out. Your mother is sidelined. You're finally breathing fresh air. Quirky side note? When you sign your name for official documents, you drop the Alexandrina. Just Victoria. Thanks. It sounds stronger, cleaner, like someone who means business. And this branding thing works. People start projecting everything they want in a monarch onto you. Stability, virtue, youth, even beauty, by Victorian standards, which, let's be honest, involve a lot of puffy sleeves and moral repression. Newspapers love you. Merchants name tea blends after you. Everyone's relieved that the monarchy has a young, fresh face. Except the politicians. They're nervous. You've got no husband, no advisor, no clue about governing, and way too much curiosity. Prime Minister Lord Melbourne steps in like a father figure. He teaches you how to play the game, how to read memos, choose ministers, and look interested during military parades. You listen. You really like Lord Melbourne. Possibly too much. It becomes a running joke at court how obsessed you are with him, but he becomes your political training wheels, and you never forget that loyalty. And while your life's transforming at Buckingham, the empire is quietly expanding like a puddle no one's mopping up. Steamships are replacing sailboats. Gunpowder diplomacy is going mainstream. You're not really running it all yet, but it's yours now, and it's growing. Fast. Debates start bubbling even at this early stage. Was your rise inevitable? Could someone else have ruled instead? Was the British monarchy already becoming just ceremonial, or were you about to reshape it? Scholars still argue over how much you shaped the empire, or how much it shaped you. But for now you're 18, newly coronated, and just trying not to fall down the palace stairs in a ridiculous crown. You have no idea that your reign will last over 63 years, define an entire era, and leave marks and scars across the globe. You might think that being queen at 18 means freedom, but let's just adjust your expectations a little. Sure, you've escaped Kensington Palace and the clutches of Sir John Conroy, but now you're sitting on an impossibly uncomfortable throne wearing robes that weigh more than you do, and every decision you make is dissected by squinting old men in powdered wigs. You're the queen, but that doesn't mean you're in control. Not really, not yet. Welcome to year one of your reign, where everything you say might start a scandal, and you still have to ask someone for help opening a window. The court is watching, the press is watching, and your mother, still living under the same roof at Buckingham, is sulking harder than a teenager denied the Orc cord. You've moved her rooms to the other side of the palace, which is basically the 19th century version of ghosting. She doesn't take it well. Your mornings are filled with paperwork, visits from ministers, and trying to remember which fork to use at dinner. You learn to speak in polite phrases that say everything and nothing at once. I shall consider it carefully becomes your new superpower. Lord Melbourne, your political mentor, is still guiding you through everything, from state documents to who not to trust in the room. He's charming, calm, and not so secretly enjoying being the man behind the curtain. He's also 25 years older than you. You're a little bit obsessed with him, and everyone knows it. But your people, they adore you. You're young, you're proper, and you haven't done anything awful. Yet. That's enough for now. The public still remembers the messy reign of George IV, whose hobbies included gambling, debt, and eating entire roast geese alone. So you, with your clean handwriting and tidy morals, are a breath of lavender-scented air. Still, let's talk about your social calendar, because it's a thing. The season, capital S, is the months of balls, dinners, and official events where eligible royals are paraded like finely bred racehorses, and your dance card is full. Everyone wants to know when you'll marry. You, of course, have been getting letters from your German cousin Albert for years. Your Uncle Leopold, the King of Belgium and everyone's favourite royal matchmaker, has been planting that seed forever, but now it's time for the real thing. Albert arrives in England, and you finally meet him face to face. Let's pause here. Cousin marriage? Very normal in your circle. If you're royalty in the 1800s, your dating pool is basically just your family tree with a few French twigs thrown in. But when you see Albert, something unexpected happens. You don't just approve, you melt. He's handsome in a serious, brooding way, thoughtful, intelligent, kind of into science and drains, but, no one's perfect. Within days, you're writing about his beautiful eyes and noble brow like a fanfic author with zero chill. Here's the twist, though. You have to propose to him, because you're the queen. That's how it works. So you gather your royal courage, take a deep breath, and awkwardly blurt it out. He accepts, probably with the world's most formal German smile, and just like that, you're engaged. Now comes the drama. The press freaks out. A German? Is he going to take power? Change everything? But you make it clear. Albert will have no official role. He won't get titles. He won't become king. He's your husband, not your co-ruler. At least that's the plan. You marry in 1840 in a ceremony filled with white lace, candles, and a small nation's worth of fresh flowers. You wear white, starting the trend that will one day launch millions of Pinterest boards. You're radiant. He's serious. And behind the scenes, you are deeply, wildly, helplessly in love. Let's not sugarcoat it. Your first year of marriage is a little rocky. You're used to being obeyed. He's used to being right. There's tension. He wants more say in politics, in your schedule, in, everything. And you're not ready to hand over the crown, but slowly over time you compromise. He handles your correspondence, he organises your schedule, he becomes the trusted manager of your life, while you remain the face of the monarchy. It's a power-sharing deal wrapped in domestic bliss. Then come the babies. First it's Vicky, then Bertie, then Alice. You don't stop until there are 9 in total. Your letters to Albert are still full of hearts and compliments, even when you're swollen, exhausted, and heavily pregnant for what feels like the 20th time. You hate childbirth. You call it the shadow side of marriage, but you do it. Anyway, again and again, because that's what queens do. They produce heirs, and you're very committed to the job. Meanwhile, the empire doesn't sleep. While you're planning christenings, your ships are circling the globe, planting flags and signing treaties with a signature you've only recently learned to make look regal. You're still in your 20s, still learning how to juggle public life and private emotion. The people see you as a maternal figure already. Young, but wise. Feminine, but strong. Even when you're just trying to figure out how to calm a colicky baby while reading a trade report from India. One historical fun fact from this stretch of your life. You're the first monarch to live in Buckingham Palace. It's new, drafty, and occasionally floods when it rains. But it becomes the symbol of your reign. And you hate how the staff talks over you. They still call you the girl. But slowly that changes. You start to develop that famous Queen Victoria stare, the one that can silence a whole room. Quirky side note, you're obsessed with dogs, weirdly obsessed. Your spaniel Dash gets a velvet-lined coffin and his own gravestone. You write emotional poems about his death. And yes, Dash outranks most of your staff in affection and privileges. Back in the political world, people are starting to realise Albert might be more than just arm candy. He's fixing things, modernising things. He's into sanitation, housing reform and education. He's the brains behind what will one day become the Great Exhibition, basically a World's Fair in a giant glass greenhouse. But we're not quite there yet. For now, you're nesting, ruling, and trying to pretend that the empire isn't slowly demanding more than you're ready to give. And of course, scholars still argue, was Albert running the show? Was your love blinding you to the political game? Or were you playing your own long, strategic plan, using Albert as cover to remain on the throne while staying popular? The debate continues, but right now, you're not thinking about any of that. You're just trying to balance a crown on your head and a baby on your hip, while your German husband explains plumbing to Parliament. There's this fantasy, early on, that maybe you'll just have the fairy tale part of the job. Be adored by your people, raise your brood of tiny royal humans, and let Albert handle the messy politics. But empires don't work like that, and being queen isn't a Hallmark movie. Sooner or later, history knocks, loudly, and reminds you that every smiling balcony wave comes with a shadow of responsibility. And it doesn't help that your husband, as much as you love him, is slowly turning into a control freak with a monocle. It's the 1840s now, and things are starting to unravel, not just in your palace nursery where toddlers scream in 6 languages, but across your entire empire. Poverty in Britain is getting worse, The Industrial Revolution has built massive wealth, but only for the people at the top. Workers are crammed into filthy cities, breathing coal smoke and eating whatever doesn't crawl off the plate first. Child labour is normal, unions are illegal, and guess who everyone blames when they're angry? You. Their queen, the rich lady in the palace. At first it's confusing. You've always thought of yourself as good-hearted and morally upright. You read scripture daily, you donate to hospitals, you tell your kids to be kind. But this is the moment you begin to realise that ruling an empire doesn't just mean waving from a carriage, it means being the face of everything people love and everything they resent. And then, right when you're adjusting to this uncomfortable realisation, something worse happens. There's a series of assassination attempts. Seriously, 7 of them during your reign. The first comes in 1840, not long after your wedding. A man named Edward Oxford fires 2 pistols at you while you're riding in a carriage with Albert. Luckily, both shots miss. You're shaken, obviously, but instead of hiding away, you do the Victorian version of clapping back. You get back in the carriage and continue your drive as if nothing happened. The people love it. Overnight, your popularity spikes. That image of a young queen, unshaken by bullets, riding stoically through London, it sticks. It becomes part of the myth. Victoria the Brave. But deep down it rattles you. This is the beginning of a lifelong awareness that you and everything you represent is always under a microscope and always a target. Now, let's talk about court life, which is becoming a sort of soap opera in lace. Your household staff is enormous and full of feuds, gossip and weird traditions. There's a footman whose entire job is just to announce your meals. You have multiple dressers, secretaries, equerries, and, eventually, your own personal Indian attendant, but we'll get to him later. There's drama over who gets invited to which ball, which noble is secretly bankrupt, and who is trying to sneak brandy into the Queen's drawing room. Half of it sounds like a Jane Austen novel if she'd been a little more gossipy. But you're not wasting your time with court scandals. You're focused on your kids, except, confession time, you're not a naturally hands-on mother. You love your children in that Victorian stiff upper lip way, but you find them loud and chaotic. You write about how you miss peace and quiet, and complain that Bertie, your heir, is lazy and not nearly as bright as Vicky, your firstborn. You love them fiercely, but you also kind of want to escape them sometimes. Relatable. Meanwhile, Albert is, well, thriving. He's slowly inserting himself into national policy. He starts championing moral reform, city planning and education. He's got big ideas, and he's not afraid to lecture Parliament about them. He designs model villages and sanitary housing like a SimCity player with too much free time. He even starts tinkering with the monarchy itself, pushing you to be more reserved, more dignified, more symbolic, less emotional, more statuesque. And honestly, you go along with it. Not because you're weak, but because you trust him. He's the only person in your life who doesn't seem to want something from you, other than a better sewer system. Together you start shaping what the monarchy should look like in a modern world. Apolitical, moral, above the fray. You become symbols of domestic virtue, the royal family as wholesome role models. Never mind the occasional tantrum or scandal. You're selling the image, and people are buying it. The press, for now, mostly behaves. Newspapers write about your dignity. They praise Albert's reforms. You become a kind of national soap bubble, floating above the ugliness of life, shimmering, untouchable. But of course, that's an illusion. There are revolutions erupting all over Europe. France has overthrown its monarchy again. In Germany and Italy, nationalist uprisings are spreading. The world is shifting, and Britain feels it too. There's a growing movement back home, the Chartists, pushing for voting rights, secret ballots, and universal male suffrage. They organise massive petitions with millions of signatures. And you're nervous. You still believe in hierarchy, in tradition, in a world where queens are appointed by God, not elected by ballot boxes. You see revolution not as progress, but as chaos. So when people protest outside your palace, you retreat behind your walls and wonder how long the peace will last. And here's where things get deeply Victorian in the most ironic way. You're both incredibly conservative and reigning over a time of explosive change. Trains are shrinking continents, telegraphs are collapsing distances, photography is capturing faces for the first time, and you're right there in the middle, posing stiffly for portraits while history races forward around you. Let's slip in a quirky fact. You were absolutely obsessed with chloroform. Once it was introduced as a method of pain relief in childbirth, you were all in. You used it for 2 of your later pregnancies, shocking the medical and religious community. Pain, they argued, was a punishment for Eve's sin. You, however, argued that Eve wasn't the one delivering your 9th child, so maybe give her a break. It's one of those moments where your private decisions ripple out into broader social change. If the Queen can take chloroform, maybe everyone else can too. Scholars continue to debate. Was this the high point of your reign? Did Albert's influence limit your political power, or save your legacy? Some argue he was the true reformer, while you were just the face. Others think you were playing the long game, using Albert's intellect to buy yourself time and authority in an empire that wasn't ready for a powerful woman. But here's what you know. You're still young, still in love, and still learning. You've survived assassination attempts, childbirths, political unrest, and dinner parties with in-laws who barely speak English. You've already ruled longer than some kings, and you have no idea that the heartbreak of your life is waiting just around the corner. Albert coughs. It's just a small, dry sound at first. You barely notice it. He's always so fastidious, always managing something, drawing up plans for education reform, writing letters to your ministers, sketching out architectural improvements to royal estates. You assume it's just a chill, something the damp London air stirred up. But that cough keeps returning. It lingers, clinging to the corners of every room like fog in your lungs. And suddenly, your life begins to unravel. Quietly, then all at once. It's 1861. You're 42. You've been queen for nearly a quarter of a century. And Albert, your great love, your partner in parenting, planning, and empire running, he's dying. It sneaks up on you, even though looking back, maybe the signs were always there. He's been tired. He's stopped riding horses. He even postponed one of his meticulous lectures about agricultural drainage. That alone should have warned you something was truly wrong. Doctors hover with all the usual 19th century charm, bloodletting, beef tea, useless tonics. You watch helplessly as Albert, the man who ran your household like clockwork and thought about the empire like a chessboard, begins to fade. In his last weeks, you try to shield him from stress, but he insists on involving himself in everything. Even your oldest son, Bertie, who's busy scandalising the royal name with his womanising ways, becomes a source of heartbreak Albert can't ignore. He writes him letters from his deathbed, chiding, instructing, always trying to fix things, even at the end. On December 14th, after weeks of fever, Albert dies at Windsor Castle. The cause? Officially typhoid fever. Some modern historians suspect Crohn's disease or even stomach cancer. Whatever it is, it's cruel, and it takes him too soon. He was just 42, same age as you, and just like that, the lights in your world dim. You fall apart. You don't scream or throw things. You collapse inward. The black crepe goes on immediately, and it never really comes off. Not for the next 40 years. The image of you that most people know, sombre, stout, eternally dressed in mourning, that begins here. You withdraw. From public appearances, from politics, from everything. You cancel balls, refuse to appear at public events. Ministers begin to panic. The monarchy is a symbol, and the symbol has gone dark. Rumours start flying. Is the Queen mad with grief? Is she abdicating? Is she still alive? You retreat to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, then to Balmoral in Scotland, your beloved escape tucked away in the Highlands, far from London's noise and expectation. The country watches, with a mix of sympathy and growing frustration. They understand grief, but this is disappearing. They miss their queen. They want their figurehead back. In your letters, the pain is raw. You write of your life as a widow, with a bleak honesty that silences anyone who tries to urge you forward. Albert wasn't just your husband. He was your brain, your structure, your emotional compass. Without him, you flounder, and no one, not even your children, can reach you. Except, perhaps, one, John Brown, a Scottish servant at Balmoral, tall, brusque, utterly unimpressed by royalty. And that's probably why you let him in. He treats you like a person, not a sovereign, calls you woman, instead of Your Majesty when he's annoyed, protects you fiercely, becomes your shadow, your companion, your emotional buoy. The court hates him. Ministers despise him. Your children think he's scandalous, but you don't care. You even commission a statue of him after he dies, something you rarely do for servants. Historians still whisper, was it just friendship? Was it romantic? Was it inappropriate? No one knows. Your journals may have held the truth, but your youngest daughter, Beatrice, edited them after your death, scrubbing out anything embarrassing. So the mystery remains, like an unopened envelope tucked in a dusty drawer. Meanwhile, the empire barrels forward. Even in mourning, you remain its symbolic heart. Prime ministers come and go. You write to them obsessively, even when you're hiding from the public. You approve laws, read daily dispatches, and keep your fingers, however gently, on the pulse of power. But make no mistake, this is your ghost period. The Widow of Windsor, they call you, not always kindly. The irony is thick. You, the queen of the world's most powerful empire, can't escape your private sorrow. You're writing letters in tear-blotted ink while your armies are establishing footholds across continents. You're cloistered in castles while your face is stamped on coins, postage, portraits. The contradiction becomes a theme of your reign, an intensely personal life playing out across a massive public stage. One curious fact, you were the first monarch to use trains regularly. Even while in mourning, you rode them, quickly, quietly, in specially modified carriages. You hated the bumpiness at first, but came to appreciate how they made your retreats and returns faster, less ceremonious. You also received telegrams, cutting-edge technology at the time, which let you stay informed without needing to see anyone. In a weird way, your seclusion was enabled by innovation, yet not everyone buys into the romantic tragedy of your grief. Some say you use mourning as a political shield, that you avoid controversy by avoiding presence, that you hide behind your widowhood to cling to power without scrutiny. Was it true? Possibly. But then again, how do you grieve the love of your life and run an empire without going numb? One thing's for sure, you never remarry. You keep Albert's rooms exactly as he left them, his clothes laid out, his shaving water prepared, every day, for decades. It's like you freeze time, as if keeping his absence present somehow keeps him alive. The people begin to stir. After the initial wave of sympathy, public patience thins. They want a queen who smiles again, who appears at openings and waves at parades. Politicians grow anxious. Newspapers sharpen their pens. Even your children start pushing, "Your mama, come back." But you resist. Grief is your kingdom now. And yet, slowly, something shifts. It begins with a jubilee, a celebration of your time on the throne. You don't want to attend. You say no. Then maybe. Then yes. And for the first time in decades, you return to public life. Still in black, of course. Always in black. But there's something electric about your reappearance. Crowds weep. Cheering shakes the streets. It's not just about you. It's about survival. You endured. And by doing so, so did the monarchy. Scholars still argue about this period. Was your mourning overdone? Did you abandon your role? Or did you in your absence teach your people something profound about love, loyalty, and the burden of memory? All you know is that the world keeps moving, and no matter how much you miss Albert, your empire isn't waiting. It's growing, tensing, shifting, and somewhere in the colonies a storm is building. Your household starts to look less like a palace and more like a miniature country of its own. You've got maids, footmen, equerries, physicians, chaplains, cooks, dressers, stable boys, and the occasional random European relative lounging in a velvet chair sipping sherry and offering unsolicited opinions. But one thing becomes very clear as the years roll on. While the royal court keeps moving in smooth ceremonial circles, your inner life remains stubbornly frozen in 1861. Albert is gone, and his absence becomes a permanent fixture in every hallway, in every diary entry, in every carefully arranged photograph where you sit, shrouded in black, staring off into the middle distance like a ghost who just found out the séance was cancelled. You make it a point to talk about him constantly, to your children, to your ministers, to literally anyone within earshot. His ideals, his lectures, his opinions, they don't fade. They become sacred texts. If Albert once had a strong feeling about horse feed, or the design of a gatehouse, you're going to bring it up. Repeatedly. in committee. You might not realise it right away, but this devotion is doing more than preserving Albert's memory. It's reshaping the entire institution of the monarchy. The Victorian court becomes synonymous with moral rigidity, solemn duty, and a kind of romanticised grief that the middle classes actually find kind of inspiring. Mourning becomes fashionable. Black lace, jet jewellery, funeral etiquette. These aren't just symbols of sadness. They're social markers now. You've accidentally launched a cultural trend that makes brooding stylish and even profitable. Somewhere a shopkeeper in London is selling widow's bonnets because of you. But while you live in emotional stasis, time outside keeps rolling forward. Britain is in the thick of the industrial age, which is a polite way of saying that factories are multiplying like rabbits on espresso. Smoke-belching chimneys are now part of every skyline, and your cities are beginning to feel like places where the sun goes to die. There are railways threading through the countryside, telegraph wires stretching over oceans, and steamships docked in every imperial harbour. This empire you technically rule is becoming monstrous in size and complexity. You've got territories in the Caribbean, strongholds in Africa, pieces of Southeast Asia, and most importantly, India. India is both the jewel in the crown and the throbbing headache behind your eyes, and you don't even rule it yet. It's still nominally under the British East India Company, a group of men with top hats, handlebar moustaches and business cards that basically say Colonialism LLC, but the facade is cracking. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, also called the Sepoy Mutiny, was a thunderclap, a mass uprising that showed Britain the limits of its assumed control. You were queen then, yes, but the crown hadn't officially taken over India yet. That came in 1858, just after the rebellion was brutally suppressed. Parliament dissolved the East India Company, and suddenly India wasn't just a colony. It was a possession of the British Crown. Your possession. You receive letters describing the rebellion in chilling detail. Massacres, executions, civilians caught in the crossfire. The horror is mutual, on both sides. But the British response is swift and merciless. Hangings, floggings, entire villages burned to the ground. In your court, it's all filtered through official language, order restored, loyalty reaffirmed, but the truth clings to the reports like soot. Afterward, you become Empress of India. The title is a bit of political theatre, really. Benjamin Disraeli, your favourite Prime Minister with the dramatic eyebrows and flair for flattery, makes it official in 1876. You love the grandeur of it. Empress sounds ancient and formidable, exactly the kind of elevation you crave in your later years, when you're still mourning and looking for ways to prove your reign has purpose beyond sadness. The irony: you never actually visit India, not once. You rule it from a distance, through carefully crafted reports and oil paintings of elephants and tigers, but you're fascinated by the place. You hire Indian servants, you learn a few phrases of Hindustani, you even add curry to the royal menu at Windsor, and you develop an unusually close relationship with Abdul Karim, your Indian attendant who teaches you about Muslim culture, causes endless court gossip, and ends up becoming one of your most trusted companions. But don't worry, we'll get to him later. He deserves his own chapter. So while you're mourning Albert, you're also slowly cementing your rule over a population of over 200 million people you'll never meet. The contradiction is staggering, but you're a master at contradictions by now. You see yourself as a moral guide, a mother to the empire, but the empire is not always motherly in return. Underneath the pageantry lies exploitation, land seized, languages erased, cultures filtered through a British lens until they're civilised, enough to display at the Great Exhibition. Still, you truly believe you're doing good, that Britain is a force for order and enlightenment, that missionaries and railways and tea exports are all pieces of a grand civilising mission. It's not hypocrisy in your mind, it's destiny. A quirky detail about this time: you're obsessed with organising things, like painfully obsessed. You redesign your servants' schedules to run like a factory. You standardise your correspondence with rubber stamps. You file your personal diaries like state documents. It's as if controlling your domestic world helps you pretend the rest of the world isn't wildly out of hand, which, to be clear, it absolutely is. And speaking of wild, your children are growing up, and not all of them are following the tidy paths you and Albert envisioned. Bertie, your heir, Edward, the future king, continues to be a source of constant disappointment. He parties too much, gambles, flirts with actresses, and doesn't understand why he can't just have a nice quiet life without the constant judgment. You write him letters. So many letters. Long scolding missives about duty and honour and Albert's values. He reads them. He doesn't change. Other children fare better. Your daughter Vicky, who married into the Prussian royal family, is intelligent and politically savvy. But her life isn't easy either. She's caught in a mess of German court politics that makes your passive-aggressive British aristocrats look like choir boys. You worry about her constantly. You love her deeply. You miss her like a limb. But here's the strange part. Even as your family fractures and your empire stretches beyond imagination, your own image becomes stronger. You, the grieving widow, the distant queen, the solemn mother of nations, become a kind of a living statue. You're no longer just Victoria. You're the queen, the symbol, the era. And that's the open question scholars still chase today. Did the role shape you, or did you shape the role? Did your personal grief create a public institution, or was the monarchy always going to bend in that direction? You'll never answer that, of course. You're too busy reviewing reports on Indian railroads while sipping lukewarm tea with a 5-day-old biscuit. But beneath the crown, behind the veil, you're still just a woman in a cold palace, writing Albert's name over and over in a diary no one is ever meant to read. The black never comes off, not for weddings, not for christenings, not even for state functions. Decades pass, and still you wear mourning like armour. By now you're less of a queen and more of a national silhouette, small, round, sombre. A woman draped in grief who somehow rules the largest empire on earth from behind a lace curtain. The world changes every year, but you don't. You just grow older and more solid, like a statue weathering in place while everything else spins around it. At court, people tiptoe around you. They lower their voices when speaking of Albert. They never joke in your presence, at least not on purpose. And if someone does try to get too familiar, you shut them down with one glance. That infamous Queen Victoria glare, lethal. You've developed it over time, the kind of look that can stop a general mid-sentence and make a duchess rethink her entire outfit. It says, you may proceed if you value your position, your reputation, and possibly your life. Despite your personal retreat, the machine of empire keeps grinding forward, and by machine, I mean steam engines, gunboats, telegraph wires, and a rising tide of civil servants, soldiers, and missionaries fanning out across the globe, all under your name. The sun famously never sets on your empire, mostly because it stretches across so many time zones. Someone somewhere is always sweating under a red British flag. It's not just land, it's power, ideas, economies. It's a system so vast, even you couldn't visit all of it in a lifetime, even if you'd wanted to, which, let's be honest, you didn't. But you still find ways to exert your presence. You approve every portrait, every medal, every school named in your honour. Children in Canada and Australia are taught to revere you before they even know how to spell their own names. Post offices hang your face above the counter. Governors recite your titles like a liturgy. And in 100 military forts from Africa to the Pacific, officers drink to your health in thick, hot air, convinced they're doing God's work by imposing railroads and British spelling on entire cultures. Still, your own life grows more insular. In the absence of Albert, you fill your days with routine. You rise early, even in your later years. Breakfast is eaten alone, often in silence. Then correspondence. Letters from ministers, notes from your children, long rambling reports from colonial outposts that describe everything from crop yields to uprisings. You read them all, underline things, annotate margins. No one ever accused you of being disengaged. You also write, constantly, diaries, letters, memos. Your handwriting, small, neat, slightly slanted, is now a thing of historical analysis. You write to your children daily, especially Bertie, though most of your letters to him have the same basic theme. Stop embarrassing me. You write to your ministers. You even write about your ministers in language that's often less than flattering. Still, you maintain a few close relationships, the most important now being with John Brown, your Scottish servant turned emotional support system. He's blunt, unpolished, often rude, and you adore him for it. He calls you woman to your face. No one else on earth would dare. You trust him more than your advisors, more than most of your children. He's with you constantly, escorting you on walks, managing your security, even appearing in paintings beside you. Naturally, the court goes absolutely feral over this. Rumours swirl. Was he your lover? Your secret husband? Did you marry him in a private ceremony hidden from the public eye? There's no proof, but there are hints. You defend him fiercely. You reward him lavishly. And after his death in 1883, you're inconsolable. You have a statue made. You mourn him deeply, just as you did Albert. Whether the relationship was romantic, platonic, or somewhere in the messy middle, we'll never truly know. Your journals might have revealed more, but Beatrice, your youngest daughter and self-appointed editor, went through your papers after your death and cut out anything that smelled too emotional, or, heaven forbid, interesting. While all this domestic drama plays out, Britain's political world is turning into something you barely recognise. Parliament is no longer a gentleman's club for top hats and cigars. It's transforming into an arena of reform, full of loud voices demanding things you'd rather not hear. Universal male suffrage, labour rights, women's rights. You're not a fan of this last one. In fact, you go on record repeatedly as being firmly against the idea of women voting. You call it a mad, wicked folly, which, to be fair, sounds exactly like something you'd say with pursed lips and an aggressively embroidered handkerchief. It's awkward too, because some of your own female subjects see you as proof that women can lead, but you make it very clear. You're the exception, not the rule. You believe in duty, divine right, and very rigid gender roles, which just so happen to keep you at the top. Feminists quote you with hopeful admiration. You scowl and write annoyed diary entries about how misunderstood you are. Still, you can't stop the wave. The world is moving on, whether you want it to or not. Cities are growing denser, louder, more industrial. Railways crisscross the nation like veins. Science is challenging everything. Darwin's theories about evolution are causing absolute uproar. You don't like them. You're a firm believer in creationism. The idea that humans descended from apes? Absurd. Offensive. You're mildly horrified every time someone brings it up. But you also know better than to fight every battle, so you quietly ignore the topic and hope it goes away, like a drafty corridor in Windsor. One fun, weird fact about this time. You become an absolute fiend for gadgets. You're a fan of new inventions. Photography, typewriters, even the telephone. You once received a call from Alexander Graham Bell himself, though you found the device a bit disagreeable and never used it again. You also sit for hundreds of photographs, becoming one of the first monarchs whose aging process is captured frame by frame. From youthful curls to stern jawlines and layers of black lace, you become history's most reluctantly immortal model. Through all this, you age, not gracefully, but powerfully. You gain weight, your mobility declines. You often have to be wheeled from room to room, but your mind stays sharp. Ministers still fear your letters, your children still dread your lectures, and the empire, it's still growing. Africa especially is being carved up like an overcooked roast at a family dinner. Britain takes big bites, and you nod along, signing treaties and accepting titles, even as the human cost piles up far from your view. Scholars look back on these years with a raised eyebrow. Did your personal grief cloud your judgment? Did you allow empire to run wild because you were too focused on mourning and memory? Or did your emotional withdrawal actually create the conditions for the monarchy to survive, by stepping back, becoming less controversial, more symbolic? You don't answer. You never do. You just press your monogrammed wax seal into another letter, set aside your teacup and call for your dresser. You don't think of yourself as fragile, but let's be honest. Grief has turned you into a bit of a fortress. People can visit, but only if they knock very politely and don't overstay their welcome. You've built walls, emotional ones, black-clad ones, the kind that keep feelings and fidgety prime ministers at bay. And yet, as much as you try to disappear into memory and mourning, the country keeps dragging you back into the spotlight. Not because they miss your speeches, you rarely give any, but because you're too symbolic to ignore. You're Victoria, after all. You're the era, like it or not. But things have changed since Albert's death. The nation has changed. You're no longer the dewy-eyed young queen with glossy curls and romantic ideals. You're something else now. Heavier, stiffer, more solitary. The public still loves you, or at least respect you, but they're starting to wonder when or if you'll ever step fully back into the role they expect you to play. They've been patient, decades patient, but even national grief has a shelf life. Enter Scotland. Not just as a place on a map, but as your spiritual rehab centre. Balmoral Castle becomes your escape pod, the one corner of your empire where people don't expect you to constantly be royal. Up there in the Highlands, everything feels simpler. The air is cleaner, the trees quieter, the kilts, bagpipes, and never-ending mist strike just the right, emotional chord, melancholy with a touch of grandeur. And John Brown, of course, makes it all more bearable. He takes you on long walks, guards you like a Highland terrier, and calls out the absurdity of court life when no one else dares. The courtiers whisper behind your back. They call him the Queen's Stallion and joke about secret marriages. You ignore them, or rather, you punish them subtly, with invitations that never arrive and promotions that mysteriously vanish. He makes you laugh, though. That's rare. He says what everyone else is too terrified to say. And while his devotion may be part service, part friendship, and part mystery, what matters is that for the first time in years, you feel seen. Not as a monarch, not as a symbol, but as a person. A woman who lost her husband, who still loves him, but who also wants to survive this life somehow. But eventually Brown dies too. It's 1883, and with him goes another tether to your humanity. You grieve again, deeply, but this time it's quieter, less dramatic. Maybe you're too tired. Maybe there's just not enough left in you to scream. Instead, you commission a statue of him, bronze and dignified, hidden away in the gardens at Balmoral. Not for the world, just for you. A private marker in a life that's never really been allowed to have privacy. The public doesn't know what to do with this version of you. The Queen, who's always there but never really present. You don't give speeches. You rarely appear in public. Parliament works around you. Monarchs on the continent are being dethroned left and right, and yet somehow you're still here. Still writing letters, still signing off on colonial campaigns, still technically ruling over 1/4 of the human population, even though most of them will never see your face in person. But then something unexpected happens. The people forgive you. Or maybe they just give up on expecting anything different. You've outlasted their impatience. You become familiar again, comforting even. The Queen who grieves. A steady presence in a world that's spinning faster every year. A mother figure for a nation that is busy being reckless, ambitious, and sometimes outright cruel, but always circling back to you for a sense of continuity. It all starts to come full circle when your Golden Jubilee rolls around in 1887. 50 years on the throne. You're 68 now, stiff, slow, and still in mourning. But finally, reluctantly, you agree to appear. There's a huge celebration. Parades, flags, choirs, ships from every corner of the empire. You ride through the streets of London in a golden carriage, while people cheer like they're seeing the ghost of an era they barely remember. And you're overwhelmed. Not just by the sound of it all, but by what it means. You hadn't realised how much the people still cared, how they needed to see you in the flesh, to feel that their own lives hadn't just slipped into chaos. They need a constant. And you, this woman dressed in black who hasn't smiled publicly in decades, are that constant. That Jubilee marks the beginning of your slow re-entry into public life. You're not throwing garden parties or learning the waltz again, but you show up. You let yourself be seen. You wave, sometimes even smile. And the people respond by leaning harder into their affection for you. You are no longer just Queen Victoria. You are Grandmama of Europe, which, by the way, is more than just a cute nickname. Your kids have married into nearly every royal house on the continent. Your daughters are queens of Germany, Norway, and Spain. Your grandchildren will go on to rule Russia, Sweden, Romania, and more. You've turned family dinners into geopolitical conferences. It's all very Game of Thrones, but with better posture and more lace. The family tree is impressive, yes, but messy. You worry constantly about Bertie's scandals, about Vicky's unhappy marriage, about your grandsons who are growing up in countries that may one day go to war with each other. You might be building an empire through family ties, but you're also planting the seeds of future conflict. something no one will fully realise until the world explodes in 1914. Still, in the twilight of your reign, you begin to let in more light. You take on new attendants, new routines, and then another man enters your inner circle, Abdul Karim, an Indian Muslim clerk sent to serve at court during your Golden Jubilee. He becomes your teacher in Hindustani, your cultural guide, and eventually, some say, your dearest companion in your final years. He calls you Mem Sahib. You write to him with tenderness. You elevate him far beyond his original station. Naturally, the court loses it. They whisper that it's another John Brown situation. They claim Abdul is manipulating you, that he's disrespectful, that he's a foreign threat. But you stand your ground. You like him. He brings something back into your life. Curiosity, connection, the faint glimmer of who you used to be before the grief took over. Eventually you send him away too, under pressure, and probably against your better judgment, but you never forget him. And when you die, you ask that he be allowed to view your body before the casket is sealed. That says something. No one knows quite what, but it says something. The scholars are still debating what kind of queen you really were. Were you aloof, out of touch, or were you strategic, using absence as power, silence as stability? Were you a lonely woman who accidentally held an empire together, or were you a symbol too heavy to ever be fully human again? Hard to say. But here you are, shuffling through corridors, holding on to memories like lifelines, still writing, still watching. You've been mourning for decades, but slowly, quietly, you're becoming something new. You're becoming legend. You don't really notice when it happens, but one day the red blotches on the world map, each one representing a British colony or dominion, begin to outnumber the blank spaces. The map looks like someone bled ink across half the globe and called it progress. You never explicitly asked to be the face of conquest, but there you are, stamped on coins in Canada, memorialised in statues across India, carved into arches in South Africa. Your empire, the one you technically rule but rarely visit, is exploding outward in all directions. Expansion isn't new. Britain's been colonising and annexing for centuries, but under your reign, it becomes a kind of national sport. You watch it grow from behind your palace windows, through reports and dispatches, through the dull drone of parliamentary debates, through the glittering updates at royal dinners where everyone pretends empire is about civilization and not profit. The numbers are dizzying. By the time you're in your later years, over 400 million people live under your crown. That's about a quarter of the human race. You rule more land than Genghis Khan, and yet you've never held a sword, never stood on a battlefield. You've never even set foot in the vast majority of your own empire. Still, the expansion continues, fueled by merchant companies, missionaries, soldiers, and bureaucrats who all speak your name as if it justifies everything. For Queen and Country becomes a war cry, a motto, a business strategy. It's embroidered into uniforms and scrawled across recruitment posters. Everyone thinks they're doing you proud, even if you have no idea what half of them are up to. The truth is, you don't micromanage the empire. You couldn't if you tried. It's too vast, too complex. But you understand its importance, both politically and personally. Empire is what gives Britain its swagger, its economy, its identity. And whether it's tea from Ceylon, diamonds from South Africa, or rubber from Malaysia, all roads seem to lead back to Buckingham Palace, even if your hands stay clean. But let's talk about India, because it's complicated. You're deeply proud of your role as Empress of India, a title you started using in 1877 after Disraeli pushed it through Parliament with the kind of flattery you find irresistible. Empress makes you feel important, timeless, grand. It reminds everyone, including you, that you're more than just a figurehead. You're history incarnate. You even learn Urdu phrases, sign letters, Victoria R and I, Regina et Imperatrix, and surround yourself with Indian art and culture, filtered through the very British lens of exotic admiration, of course. But it's not all turbans and silk. The British Raj is built on violence, inequality and suppression. Famines rage across India during your reign, partly due to natural causes, but also worsened by British economic policy. Millions die. Grain is exported even as people starve. Officials write up tidy reports blaming local mismanagement, while London turns away. You're informed, yes, You receive telegrams, you express concern, but it's a distant sort of worry, softened by layers of bureaucracy and good intentions, and yet you genuinely believe in your mission. You think British rule brings stability, law, education. You see yourself as a mother figure to your colonial subjects, a benevolent empress from afar. Never mind that most of your subjects will never see your face, never hear your voice, never speak your language. It's the idea of you that matters. You're Queen Victoria, the little woman in black who somehow towers over continents. The same pattern plays out elsewhere. In Africa, your empire scrambles to grab territory before France and Germany can. Lines are drawn across maps by men in suits who've never seen the terrain they're dividing. Local kingdoms are overrun, tribal leaders coerced or killed, languages erased. You don't order these things directly, but they happen under your banner. The British flag goes up, and so does your portrait. Australia and New Zealand are a little more manageable, mostly settlers, gold rushes, and awkward negotiations with indigenous populations that somehow always favour the crown. Canada, quietly loyal, icy, covered in pine trees and apologies. You like Canada. You like the idea of dominions, places that look British, feel British, and send polite letters of allegiance every jubilee. It's strange though, as your empire gets bigger, your own world keeps shrinking. Your health is fading. Your legs ache constantly. You need help walking. Your appetite dwindles. You spend more time in bed, more time surrounded by paperwork and silence. And yet, you still reign. You're still the face on every flagpole. When British troops conquer a new port or fortress, they raise your banner before the smoke even clears. Here's a quirky detail. You're obsessed with geography. You know the names of your governors, the layout of your colonies, the trade goods they produce. You keep globes and maps in your private rooms, marking new acquisitions with pins. It's like empire is your version of scrapbooking, except instead of ribbon and glue sticks, you have armies and treaties. One of your favourite hobbies in these later years? Reviewing reports from the colonies. You read them in bed with a magnifying glass, scribbling notes in the margins. You're especially interested in missionary efforts. You approve of spreading Christianity, of course. But you also worry that some of the methods are a little too aggressive. You want your empire to seem kind, even when it's not. But not everyone buys the branding. Opposition grows, not just in colonies, but in Britain itself. Voices begin to rise. Critics, radicals, reformers. They question the morality of empire. They call it theft, subjugation, racial arrogance. You're aware of the unrest, but you dismiss most of it as noise from people who don't understand the burden of ruling. Or worse, people who've forgotten their place. One open debate among modern scholars is whether you truly understood the scale of what you were part of. Were you a brilliant political figurehead who skillfully balanced symbolism and policy? Or were you more like a ghost in the machine, floating above decisions too complicated, too brutal, too modern to fully grasp? You were never in the field. You never heard the crack of a rifle over sugarcane fields or the quiet footfalls of soldiers on jungle trails. But you saw the end results, maps that grew redder every year, and you approved. Despite the contradictions, the expansion under your reign becomes your crown jewel. Historians now call it the Second British Empire, bigger, faster, and more industrial than the first. It's a machine that feeds itself, sucking in resources, labour and influence, and at the top of it all sits you, a woman in mourning clothes with tired eyes, and a pen that still signs everything with precise, unshaking authority. So while the empire charges forward, annexing, conquering, reforming, you remain in place, still writing, still watching, still, somehow, reigning. You don't have to chase power. It comes to you. It always has. India isn't just part of your empire anymore. It's your personal obsession. You've never set foot there, yet you carry it with you in every hallway of every palace, draped in the silk, gold-threaded, a fascination of a place you've romanticised from afar. It's the crown jewel in more ways than one, not just in trade or territory, but in how it becomes a kind of emotional balm, something vibrant and alive that distracts you from the cold emptiness Albert left behind. If Albert was your heart, India is your strange, distant muse. After your golden jubilee, things really take a turn. You're well into your 70s now, Your joints protest when you so much as look at stairs, and your appetite for grand events is minimal. But India still energizes you. You've already been made Empress of India, a title you adore, but now you want more than just paperwork and maps. You want connection. You want a personal link to this land that's come to symbolize your global reach. Enter Abdul Karim. He's young, he's Indian, he's Muslim. And his arrival at court in 1887 as a simple servant sparks one of the most bizarre and intimate relationships of your later life. At first, he's meant to be nothing more than a token, something exotic to decorate the margins of your jubilee, a face to make the empire seem cosmopolitan. But almost immediately he captures your attention. He's tall, charming, eager, and completely unbothered by palace protocol. He speaks to you with warmth, not calculation. And, like John Brown before him, he treats you like a person, not just a monument. Within weeks, he's more than a servant. You make him your munshi, your teacher. He gives you daily lessons in Hindustani and Persian. You soak it up like rain in parched soil. You begin writing notes in Urdu script, even sign off your affectionate mother in some of your letters to him. You ask questions, you read poetry, you become enchanted with Mughal history, Indian food and Muslim customs. Your court is scandalized. Oh, the whispering. If they thought John Brown was a scandal, Abdul Karim is an international incident. Not only is he not noble, he's not even white. The racism is thick enough to choke on. Your ministers hate him. Your own children accuse him of having undue influence. They claim he's sneaky, ambitious, a manipulator. And what do? You promote him. You give him a house on the grounds. You invite his family to stay. You photograph him in court portraits. It's your empire. Why not run your household like it? People are absolutely losing their minds over this. The Prime Minister writes anxious letters. Courtiers resign in protest. And still, you keep him close. You don't care that they hate him. In fact, part of you seems to enjoy the defiance. You, Queen Victoria, the symbol of moral rigidity and imperial discipline, are sheltering an Indian clerk in your royal bosom. It's the most emotionally rebellious thing you've done in decades. Is it romantic? There's no clear evidence. Your letters are affectionate but restrained. There are no breathless diary entries or suspicious hotel bills. What's more likely is that Abdul becomes what John Brown was before, someone to talk to. Someone who doesn't flinch around your grief, your mood swings, your slow physical decline. Someone who reminds you that there's more to the world than black crepe and ceremonial ink. And maybe, too, he becomes a way for you to pretend the empire is something kinder than it is. Through Abdul, India becomes personal. Not just a crown jewel, but a friend. A human face. You can't erase the violence and inequality of the Raj, but in your mind, you're connecting. Bridging. Humanizing. You even try to give Abdul a knighthood. Your ministers block it. You're furious. You threaten to fire people. You don't win the fight, but the fact that you tried becomes its own statement. You never back down when your emotions are involved. Never. Meanwhile, the empire is shifting under your feet. Rebellions are still breaking out, mostly in places the average Brit can't find on a map. There are mutinies in Africa, riots in India, and anti-British sentiment flaring up like brush fires across the colonies. You don't deal with these directly. You've got generals and viceroys and cables for that, but you feel the tremors. Back home, things are equally uneasy. The working class is getting louder. Socialist ideas are brewing in pubs and pamphlets. The newspapers are filled with stories about strikes and slums and the moral failing of the rich. Some say the empire is a distraction from domestic rot, that it lets the elites feel noble while their own cities drown in smog and sewage. You're aware, vaguely, but you don't dwell on it. Your focus remains personal. You continue writing letters, dozens a day. You continue receiving dispatches from across the empire, filled with updates about harvests, census numbers, troop deployments. It's overwhelming, but it gives you structure, purpose. One quirky detail, you now keep a personal physician and a spiritual advisor. You've become a firm believer in homeopathy, even as your more rational-minded ministers roll their eyes. You sip diluted potions with strange Latin names and insist they're helping. You also become mildly obsessed with spiritualism, though you never go full séance. That would be undignified. Still, you occasionally read letters from people claiming to speak to Albert's ghost. You don't believe them. Not really, but you read them anyway. Scholars still debate what Abdul Karim meant to you. Was he a symbol of rebellion, a surrogate son, a cultural bridge, or just another emotional crutch in a life defined by absence? No one knows. After your death, your family burns almost all of your correspondence with him. They erase him from official memory as efficiently as they can, but a few documents survive, tucked away in dusty archives, proof that he mattered to you, that he existed in your story, even if they tried to scrub him out. And you? You keep writing until your fingers swell too much to hold the pen. You dictate when you can't write. You eat less. You sleep more. You feel the weight of everything. The grief, the years, the miles of empire that stretch in all directions from your bed. But even now, late in the game, you still have moments of clarity. A joke shared with a grandchild. A letter read aloud that makes you laugh. A sunset over Balmoral that makes you whisper Albert's name into the Highland air. These are the moments that keep you going. Quiet, steady, still the Queen. And beyond your walls, the Empire keeps marching, redrawing borders and erecting statues always in your name. There's a strange contradiction you've never been able to shake. You're the head of an empire that bans the slave trade, yet your rule rests on the backs of millions of people who have no say in their own lives. It's one of the great paradoxes of your reign, a legacy dressed in righteousness but stitched with exploitation. You signed laws that ended slavery across the British colonies in the 1830s, back when you were barely out of girlhood, and people still quote that as a moral victory of your early years. And it was a victory, at least on paper. But the shadow of forced labour doesn't vanish just because someone puts their signature on a scroll. You know this, though you rarely say it aloud. You're not naive. You've read the reports, carefully sanitised for royal eyes, of course, but still the truth leaks through. In India, Africa, the West Indies, wherever the Union Jack flaps in the wind, there are people working under conditions that would appall your polished London dinner guests. Fields worked under a burning sun, children conscripted into labour, coolie contracts that might as well be shackles. And yet, in the court speeches and the grand ceremonies, it's all packaged as civilization. That's the branding. The empire isn't conquering, it's uplifting, teaching hygiene, introducing railways, offering salvation by Queen and Christ. You've always liked that image, of Britain as a benevolent parent guiding the unruly children of the world. It makes it easier to sleep at night. The empire in your mind isn't built on greed or violence. It's a duty, a divine one even. But then there are the contradictions. You sign off on the abolition of slavery, yet in places like British Guiana and Trinidad, you replace enslaved Africans with indentured Indian labourers, free, in name only, living in barracks, underpaid and brutalised. The machinery of empire doesn't stop, it just changes gears. You end one system and replace it with another, and the engines of sugar, cotton and tea keep roaring along uninterrupted. At home, your subjects adore you for your morality. You're the respectable widow, the empress with high cheekbones and higher values. They build entire social codes around your image. Victorian values, they call them. Modesty, temperance, obedience. It's all very shiny on the surface, and you do care about the moral character of your people, especially the middle class. You praise charity. You write encouraging notes to hospital founders. You honour missionaries who travel to far-flung corners of the world to save souls, and sometimes, unintentionally, destroy cultures. Here's a quirky detail. You're oddly obsessed with cleanliness. Not just metaphorically, literally. Sanitation is a major concern of yours, especially after Albert's death, which you partly blame on poor plumbing at Windsor. You support the Public Health Acts, and you cheer when your ministers talk about sewage reform. You even insist that your own palaces be updated with proper drains and flushing toilets, an innovation you once found vulgar but now consider essential. If Albert taught you anything, it's that civilization begins in the bathroom. Still, for all your emphasis on moral purity and hygiene, you remain deeply uncomfortable with change, especially when it comes to your own role. You hate the idea of being a passive symbol, but you're also uneasy with public activism. You see yourself as a guiding light, not a revolutionary. So when movements rise that don't align with your views, especially those led by women, you push back hard. You loathe the women's suffrage movement. You think it's unnatural, dangerous. You genuinely believe women are meant to nurture, not govern. Your own power, to your mind, is an exception, not a template. You write letters denouncing suffragists as wicked and foolish. You can't imagine a world where women in Parliament would do anything but collapse into emotional squabbling. Your critics, of course, point out the irony. You're the most powerful woman in the world, and yet you oppose giving any power to women. They call you out in pamphlets and speeches, but it doesn't change your mind. You see your reign not as proof that women are capable of leading, but that you were chosen by God. The rest, well, they should stick to hosting tea and raising children. Meanwhile, other contradictions pile up. You adore soldiers. You honour them with medals and regiments and state funerals. You write heartfelt letters to widows. But you also preside over a period of relentless expansionist warfare. In Burma, in Sudan, in Afghanistan. You read the casualty list with trembling hands. You mourn, and then you sign off on the next campaign. You love peace, but the empire never stops marching. You believe in Christianity, but you rule millions of Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists and atheists. You believe they should be saved, but you also demand loyalty. Convert or not, they better obey. That's the deal. Salvation is optional. Submission is not. And in your own family, the contradictions get messier. Bertie, your heir, is a disappointment you can't seem to fix. He drinks, he flirts, he associates with people you find vulgar. You've spent years grooming him to be more like Albert, and he has stubbornly remained Bertie. You don't trust him with power. You think he'll ruin everything the minute he ascends. You even try to keep him out of state affairs as long as humanly possible, which is awkward, because he's pushing 60 and still waiting for his first day on the job. Then there's Vicky, brilliant, articulate, and completely trapped in the German royal court. She writes you long, aching letters from Berlin, detailing the political squabbles and intellectual debates she endures. You miss her terribly. You wish she'd married someone British, someone simpler. You love her, but she reminds you of how little control you have once your children leave your orbit. And yet, you do wield control. Enormous control. Your ministers often grumble about how hard it is to get anything past you. You insist on being consulted on everything. Appointments, policy changes, even the wording of official condolences. You're still writing 20 to 30 letters a day. Your pen may be frail, but your will is steel. Modern historians argue over how much real power you had. Some say you were a mere symbol, a figurehead cloaked in sentimental tradition. Others say you were a quiet force behind every major policy, a master of soft power who influenced with silence and scorn more effectively than any politician. They debate your intentions, your awareness, your complicity. You don't bother answering. You never have. Instead, you sit in your study, surrounded by busts of Albert, portraits of your children, and stacks of correspondence from every corner of the globe. The window is cracked open. You can smell rain. Somewhere in the empire a ship is setting sail. Somewhere a mine is being dug. Somewhere a classroom is reciting your name. And in London, a suffragist is setting up a soapbox and preparing to shout into the wind. There's something almost poetic, if slightly absurd, about building a massive glass palace, just to show off steam engines, looms and taxidermied ostriches. But that's exactly what happens in 1851, when the Great Exhibition opens its doors in Hyde Park. You're there, of course. You don't miss this one, the First World's Fair, your husband Albert's brainchild, his gleaming love letter to progress and the British Empire. He's been planning it for years, obsessing over every gear and girder, and now it stands before you. A 990,000 square foot greenhouse made of iron and glass, absurdly enormous and entirely magnificent. They call it the Crystal Palace, and honestly, it's a vibe. You ride there in your carriage with Albert and the children, surrounded by cheering crowds and the oddly comforting smell of horses and pastry vendors. Inside, it's like stepping into the future. Machines from Manchester, cotton from India, porcelain from China, whale skeletons, giant diamonds, American daguerreotypes, looms that can do the work of 10 men. It's industrial flexing at its finest, a showcase of what empire and invention can accomplish when poured into a building the size of a city block. Albert is in his element. He's practically glowing. You don't say much, you never really like crowds, but you watch him beam with pride, and something in your heart relaxes. He needs this. After years of being dismissed as the foreign prince, and denied any real political power, This is his triumph. He's not on the throne, but he's just orchestrated one of the most ambitious public projects in history. Everyone knows it. Even the critics are impressed. You feel it too, that electric pulse of pride and possibility. The public pours in by the millions. Over 6 million visitors come through the Crystal Palace during its 5-month run. That's a third of the population of Britain. They arrive in trains built just for the occasion. They pay $1 each. They gasp at the exhibits, buy guidebooks, eat questionable meat pies, and go home with stories that sound like dreams. It becomes more than a fair. It becomes a national myth. But this isn't just about marvelling at telescopes and spinning jennies. It's a declaration, a statement to the world that Britain is not only powerful, it is modern, civilised, innovative, forward-looking. The empire isn't just a collection of colonies anymore. It's a machine, a brand, a self-perpetuating engine of trade and science and spectacle. And your presence, the silent queen in black silk flanked by a beaming prince and unnervingly well-behaved royal children, gives it all the stamp of legitimacy. You attend multiple times, but you never stay too long. The glass makes the heat unbearable and the noise is constant. But Albert, he practically moves in. He studies the exhibits, talks to inventors, writes notes in his tiny script. He's imagining what this all could become, how education, art and science could elevate society. And you're watching him do it, quietly proud, slightly amused, and just a little worried. His energy is always burned too brightly. You can't help but wonder how long he can sustain it. The Great Exhibition is such a success that it makes money, a lot of money, enough to fund what will become the museums in South Kensington, the Victoria and Albert Museum naturally, the Natural History Museum and the Science Museum. Albert is planning a cultural district before people even understand what that means. You're not as obsessed with museums as he is, but you love that his name will live on in something other than footnotes and footstools. Here's a quirky little footnote you never see coming. Someone brings in the Koh-i-Noor diamond, freshly acquired from India and placed in the centre of the exhibition as a prize jewel. It's enormous, blinding, completely wrapped in colonial myth. The public gawks at it. You're polite about it, though privately you find it a bit much. Later, it'll be recut and set into a royal crown, but even then, the stone carries weight. Not just in carats, but in controversy. It's still disputed to this day. India, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, everyone wants it back. But for now, it's just another glittering symbol of empire, sitting behind glass under your watchful eye. As the exhibition wraps up, you're exhausted, relieved, and genuinely moved. It's one of the few moments in your life where optimism doesn't feel like a lie. You and Albert take a quiet walk through the building late one evening, after the crowds have gone. The light filters through the glass like a dream. He talks about the future. You listen. You don't say much. But your hand rests lightly on his arm, and for that moment everything feels possible. Of course, it won't last. Albert throws himself into more work, more reform, more plans. He takes on government business unofficially, writing letters, drafting proposals, acting as the monarch's brain when you're overwhelmed or distracted. People notice. Some resent it. Others quietly thank God that someone with a functioning moral compass is steering the ship. But he works too hard. He always has, and you ignore the warning signs until they're too loud to dismiss. The coughs, the fatigue, the slow, hollow look that creeps into his eyes. He dies a decade after the exhibition in 1861, and though you survive it, you never really come back from it. The Crystal Palace becomes a ghost of that happiness, a monument not just to progress, but to everything you lost. Still, it stands. After the exhibition, they move the entire structure to Sydenham Hill. It becomes a cultural hub, a permanent wonder, until of course it burns to the ground in 1936. But you won't live to see that. In your mind, it remains untouched, frozen in glass, filled with music and invention, and the sound of Albert's voice echoing off the iron beams. There's still scholarly debate about whether the exhibition was just a giant imperial flex or something deeper. Was it a public distraction, a capitalist circus, or a genuine moment of connection between the monarchy and its people, between industry and imagination? Maybe all of the above. But whatever it was, it belonged to you, to him. It was your shared triumph, your love letter to the world, sealed with a pane of glass. And long after the walls come down, that shimmering vision of progress and possibility follows you like a memory you can't shake. A memory that, for a moment, made the Empire seem almost beautiful. It starts in the cold, wet mud of the Crimean Peninsula, where soldiers dig trenches with spoons and horses starve under grey skies. You're sitting comfortably at Windsor, wrapped in blankets, sipping your thin, reliable tea, while dispatches from the front arrive by the dozen, detailing not only the battles, but the catastrophe unfolding behind the scenes. You expect war to be violent, of course. You even expect the losses. What you don't expect is that Britain, mighty, industrial Britain, is somehow losing more men to cholera and incompetence than to enemy gunfire. The Crimean War, your first real war as Queen, starts in 1853, when the Ottoman Empire, Russia, France and Britain all decide they have opinions about holy sites in Jerusalem and the balance of power in the East. There's diplomacy, posturing, and finally predictable cannon fire. Britain joins to check Russian expansion, and ideally, keep Constantinople from becoming Tsar Nicholas's personal trophy. From the beginning, it's clear that your army is not ready. The logistics are a joke. Supplies rot on docks. Boots arrive in mismatched sizes. Wounded men lie in blood-streaked snow with no doctors in sight. You, safely miles away, receive these accounts with mounting horror. You've always seen the British military as a moral force, disciplined, loyal, blessed by God and empire. But now you learn that bureaucracy, not bullets, is killing your men. And then, Florence Nightingale. She isn't royal, she isn't military. She's just a determined woman with a lamp and a spine made of wrought iron. When she arrives at the British hospital in Scutari, she finds it packed with filth, open sewage, and the stench of infection. Most of the men won't live long enough to die from their wounds. They're taken by disease, despair, and the sheer chaos of neglect. Nightingale gets to work with a small team of nurses, transforming the place into something that resembles mercy. You don't meet her in person at first. You hear about her, read about her. The press starts calling her the lady with the lamp, and the public clings to her as a figure of redemption in a war that's looking more disastrous by the week. You're intrigued. More than that, you're impressed. A woman commanding a hospital, ordering around generals and surgeons. It doesn't fit your worldview, but you can't deny her results. You send her a brooch. It's ornate, personalised. A royal thank you in the form of glittering metal. But even Florence can't fix everything. The war continues. The siege of Sevastopol drags on. Thousands die. The charge of the Light Brigade becomes a legend for all the wrong reasons. Cavalry ordered into a suicidal attack, slaughtered by artillery, all because someone misunderstood a command. Tennyson writes a poem about it, and suddenly, heroism is soaked in blood and bureaucratic failure. Back in London, the press is relentless. This is the first war covered by modern journalists. The public isn't relying on vague pamphlets or sanitised reports. They're reading real-time horror stories printed in black and white. They see the names of dead sons in the papers. They demand answers. They start to blame. And some of that blame naturally drifts toward you. You aren't making the tactical decisions, of course. You're not drawing up plans in smoky war rooms. But you are the face of the nation, the queen, the empress, the figure on every banner. And in wartime, symbols matter. When things go wrong, the people want their sovereign to look them in the eye and care. So you do. You write to wounded soldiers. Personally. Hundreds of letters signed in your own hand. You send fruit, clothes, books. You visit hospitals. You ask questions about how the dead are buried, how the survivors are treated. You learn the names of regiments. You make it clear. You see them. You're not hiding behind your crown. This is the moment your role shifts. You're not just a monarch now. You're a mother. A national mother, mourning and consoling. It's a clever move politically. But it's not just strategy. You genuinely feel the loss. You see these soldiers as yours. In the strange Victorian way, you see everyone under your rule. You're not a warlord. But you believe in duty, sacrifice, honour. And this war, grim as it is, becomes the forge for that identity. And for the first time in your reign, the public responds to your grief with something new. affection. You're no longer just the cold, ceremonial figure in pearls and petticoats. You're the queen who writes to soldiers, the queen who thanks nurses, the queen who feels. It softens you. It also strengthens you. There's a curious side note in this war. It's the first conflict where telegrams become a weapon of bureaucracy. Messages arrive in hours, not weeks. Commanders in Crimea receive conflicting orders from London faster than they can react. It's revolutionary, and also deeply chaotic. The Empire is learning that technology can shrink distance, but it can't fix incompetence. Not yet. When the war finally ends in 1856, with the Treaty of Paris, you breathe a public sigh of relief. It wasn't a glorious victory, it wasn't a disaster either. It was something in between, messy, mournful, expensive. But it changes how Britain fights, and how you rule. Military reforms follow, sanitation reforms, army medical care is forever improved, Florence Nightingale becomes a national saint, and you? You become something closer to human. There's still scholarly debate about how much this war changed you. Was it the beginning of your transformation into a more public-facing monarch? Or just a temporary spasm of empathy in an otherwise private, calculated reign? No one can say for sure, but you remember the names of battles like Scars, Balaclava, Inkerman, Alma. They stay with you. You attend memorials, lay wreaths, you ask to meet veterans, you hold their hands and thank them. You don't cry. That's not your way. But something shifts in your gaze. Your diaries during this period show a quiet, relentless sorrow, not just for Albert, but for all of them. The boys who didn't come home, the families who wrote to you with trembling hands. You answer as many as you can. You sign off as Victoria R., but they read it as something else. Mother. And long after the last musket fires, you remember the war not for its politics, but for the way it dragged you, against your will, back into the hearts of your people. It starts with a shipment of opium and ends with a stack of unequal treaties, a ruined dynasty, and a series of humiliations that ripple across the globe. It's the 1830s and 1840s, and while you're sitting in your palace watching your empire grow redder and richer, half a world away, Britain is smuggling narcotics into China by the boatload. It's not the kind of thing anyone puts in a speech, but it's there, pulsing under the polished surface of your reign. And whether or not you knew every detail, your crown sits heavy on the profits. The Opium Wars are a mess of morality, money and gunpowder. In the early 19th century, Britain has a problem. It's importing tons of tea, silk and porcelain from China, but the Chinese don't want much of what Britain has to offer in return. They're not interested in wool or coal or cheap British manufactured goods. The balance of trade is lopsided, and gold is flowing out of British coffers. Naturally, someone in the East India Company has a brilliant, terrible idea: sell opium. Lots of it. Opium is grown in British-controlled India, packaged and shipped off to Chinese ports, where it's sold illegally, addicting millions. The Chinese government, understandably, isn't thrilled. They confiscate shipments, arrest dealers, and beg Britain to stop. But Britain sees addiction as business, and business, under your empire, has gunboats. When the Chinese seize and destroy a massive shipment of opium in 1839, Britain responds the way empires do, with warships. The First Opium War begins. It's hardly a fair fight. British. Technology, steam-powered gunboats, modern rifles, naval coordination, crushes Qing resistance. In 1842, China sues for peace, and you sign the Treaty of Nanking. It's called an unequal treaty for a reason. China pays a huge indemnity, opens up 5 ports to British trade, grants most favoured nation status, and, oh yes, hands over Hong Kong. You now rule Hong Kong. A misty island off the coast of a massive, ancient civilization that you've just humiliated into submission. Not a single Brit outside of the Navy had probably heard of it a decade ago, but now it's yours. Another red dot on the map, another imperial foothold in Asia, and it's only the beginning. The Second Opium War follows in the 1850s, another round of gunboat diplomacy dressed up as moral outrage. This time it's about opening up more ports, more access, more profit. British and French forces storm Beijing, loot the Summer Palace, and burn it to the ground in 1860. You don't see it, of course, but your soldiers describe it in florid letters: golden peacocks, jewelled boxes, embroidered silks going up in flames. A little piece of paradise turned to ash. They send you some of the spoils, trophies, souvenirs of victory. Was it justified? That's still debated. Some say it was about free trade, others about punishing insult, but underneath it all it was always about power. Britain wanted China open, broken and useful, and under your reign it gets exactly that. But you're far away from the noise. You don't fire the cannons or negotiate the treaties, but your signature hovers above them like a ghost. Your image is printed on the coins the Chinese are now forced to accept. Your flag flutters above foreign soil. You're the face of British honour, even as your navy enforces opium deals at gunpoint. It's not that you were cruel, necessarily, just removed. You often write about morality, about being a good Christian ruler, about protecting your people. But empire has a way of making good intentions irrelevant. And when you live in palaces, hear filtered reports, and are surrounded by ministers who reassure you that the heathens were asking for it, well, the world starts to make a certain brutal kind of sense. Still, something about China makes you uneasy. You like the artistry, the porcelain, the calligraphy. You're curious about their traditions, even respectful in your own distant way. You find Chinese court etiquette fascinating if a bit overcomplicated, and you privately express concern, once or twice, over how British actions might be misunderstood. But you never push back. You never say no. The empire rolls forward, and you nod along. There's a quirky bit of fallout from all this, literally. One of the war's unexpected gifts to Britain is the popularity of tea. It explodes after the Opium Wars. What was once a genteel luxury becomes a national addiction. Tea breaks, teapots, afternoon tea, every British household builds, little rituals around something harvested and traded under imperialism. You help, of course, by making it fashionable. You have your own custom blends, your own porcelain cups, your own carefully choreographed tea time routines. Millions copy you without knowing that every sip carries a history of war and addiction. And then there's Hong Kong. It starts as a dusty outpost, but under British rule, it transforms. Traders, missionaries, opium barons and soldiers swarm the place. The city grows fast, modern, strange, bilingual, electric with tension. It's not exactly British, not exactly Chinese. It becomes its own thing, a living contradiction, a hinge between worlds. And even though you never visit, your portrait is hung in government buildings, your name on ships, on coins, on stamps. You are, quite literally, Queen of the island. Hong Kong is leased in perpetuity, or so Britain believes. You probably never imagine that one day it'll be handed back. But that's a story for another century. For now, it's just another outpost in your empire, another reminder that when Britain wants something, whether it's spices, silk or sovereignty, it takes it, and wraps it in ceremony later. Scholars today argue over how aware you were of the imperial violence behind these deals. Some think you were too sheltered, too romantic about empire to truly grasp it. Others think you knew exactly what was happening, and simply saw it as the price of power. Maybe it was both. Maybe you compartmentalized. You wouldn't be the first royal to look the other way when the ships came home full. And then there's the larger philosophical question. Can a woman who ruled a quarter of the world not be responsible for its pain? You wouldn't have called yourself an imperialist, but your reign is the high water mark of empire, its crowning moment, its golden age. And China, battered and bruised by British ambition, is one of the clearest reflections of what that means. Trade wrapped in coercion, diplomacy enforced with warships, honour defended with flame. You return to your correspondence. You ask after your grandchildren. You plan your garden improvements at Balmoral. But out there, on the other side of the world, men are still planting flags in your name. The empire expands, and you remain, constant, grieving and always watching. You've spent most of your reign watching maps change colour, white and green and brown turning to British red, and nowhere does that red spread faster, or more chaotically, than across Africa. It's not subtle, it's not clean, and it's definitely not peaceful. You rarely see the dirt and the blood yourself, of course. Your court doesn't carry bayonets. But behind the lace curtains of Windsor, dispatches arrive that read more like conquest disguised as civil service. The scramble for Africa, they'll call it later. At the time, your ministers just call it opportunity. It all kicks off in earnest around the 1880s, when European powers suddenly realise Africa isn't just an exotic continent, it's a treasure chest, a market, a blank slate, and most importantly, not yet fully claimed. France is slicing off chunks in the west. Belgium's King Leopold is personally colonising the Congo under the thinnest possible veil of philanthropy. Germany wants in. Portugal demands its historic due. And Britain? Well, Britain decides it wants a corridor, Cape to Cairo. That's the dream. One continuous British-controlled line running from the southern tip of the continent to the Mediterranean. So the race begins, not with sprinting, but with sketching. The infamous Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 becomes a kind of imperial draft day. European diplomats gather, none of them African, and start drawing borders with straight lines that laugh in the face of language, culture, or geography. You aren't there, of course. You're in mourning robes as usual, but your representatives are. They take notes, they make deals, they walk away with new territories boxed and labelled, like parcels in a royal post room. Soon after, British troops, missionaries, and railway companies flood in. In West Africa, you annex the Gold Coast, modern Ghana. In East Africa, you claim Kenya and Uganda. You declare protectorates over Zanzibar, the Seychelles, and Somaliland. You move into the interior, up rivers, over deserts, building forts and telegraph lines and declaring order wherever the Union Jack lands. It's dizzying. It's bold. It's brutal. And the strange thing? The justifications never change. Every time a new territory is seized, the rationale is the same. Stability, trade, Christianity, civilization. Your ministers frame it as a favour to the uncivilized. You're not conquering, you're educating. You're not looting, you're investing. You send in governors with crisp uniforms and grand titles. They return with lists of minerals, crops, and native customs. It's bureaucracy with bayonets, and it all carries your seal. One of the more surreal symbols of your growing influence is Cecil Rhodes, a man so imperial he practically sweats colonialism. He's ambitious, wealthy, vaguely unsettling, and utterly obsessed with linking your empire across Africa like a spine of rail and stone. He founds Rhodesia, modern-day Zimbabwe and Zambia, and names it after himself, which should have been a red flag. He dreams of British flags fluttering all the way from the Cape of Good Hope to Cairo. He believes the Anglo-Saxon race is destined to rule the world. And he says this out loud, frequently, with disturbing sincerity. You don't personally endorse every move he makes, but you don't stop him either. He's knighted, celebrated. His wealth pours into scholarships, including one at Oxford that still bears his name. People admire him. They also quietly fear what he represents, an empire that's no longer pretending to be subtle. Here's a strange fact. While this carving up of Africa is happening, your court develops a mild obsession with the aesthetic of empire. You collect African artifacts, shields, spears, ivory figurines. Your museums fill with items removed, or let's say liberated from local cultures. You display them in polished glass cases, never quite asking whether they should have remained where they were found. And in palaces from London to Balmoral, the decor begins to shift. You add exotic accents, strange gifts from governors, portraits of warriors and landscapes you'll never see with your own eyes. Meanwhile, the people on the ground, the Africans, are rarely part of the conversation, except when they are resisting, and they do resist. From the Ashanti in West Africa to the Zulu in the south, resistance flares up again and again. Some fight with spears, some with rifles, some with diplomacy, but the end is always the same. British troops arrive, rebellion is crushed, leaders are exiled, territories are absorbed, and the maps keep turning red. One of the most haunting examples of this comes in Sudan during the Mahdist uprising. Your General Gordon, sent to restore order, is besieged and killed in Khartoum in 1885. You're furious, grief-stricken. You write scathing letters to your Prime Minister for not sending reinforcements in time. The public rallies around Gordon as a martyr. Statues go up. And a few years later, Britain returns with overwhelming force and reconquers the region. It's painted as revenge, justice, but it's empire, just empire. Historians now argue over how much of this you understood. Some claim you were above it all, focused on court life and grandchildren. Others say you were absolutely informed. Perhaps not of every bullet fired, but certainly of the ideology behind it. You signed the charters, you honoured the governors, you praised the missionaries, and when people returned from Africa, they bowed, and you thanked them. And yet, you're not heartless. You express sorrow at reports of bloodshed. You write mourning letters to the families of soldiers. You sometimes question whether violence could have been avoided. But those concerns always sit politely in the margins. The machinery of empire keeps turning, and you never truly block its gears. There's a strange duality in your role. You don't fight, but your name justifies the fighting. You don't conquer, but the conquerors call you mother. And back in Britain, your image grows ever more sacred. Statues of you begin appearing in colonial cities, Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town. You become the distant monarch with the solemn face and the generous smile, a woman on a pedestal, literally, who somehow unites London and Lagos through sheer symbolic gravity. Here's a fun detail. One of the most popular songs of your reign, Rule Britannia, becomes a kind of unofficial imperial anthem. The lyrics, Britons never shall be slaves, are belted out with zero irony by an empire founded on domination. You're not a fan of theatrics, but you do enjoy music. You prefer something calmer, something less contradictory. The open debate today is whether this kind of empire could have existed without your tacit approval. Was it inevitable? Were you merely a passenger on a ship captained by others? Or were you steering, gently but firmly, with a gloved hand and a motherly smile? Whatever the answer, the truth is this: Africa was transformed under your reign. Borders drawn, kingdoms broken, lives changed. You never marched through the savannah or sailed up the Congo River, but your name did, your flag did, your empire did. And while you sit at Windsor, smoothing letters on your desk, another red line is drawn across the continent, neat, tidy, and entirely indifferent to the people who live beneath it. The first time someone suggests Canada might not want to be ruled, from thousands of miles away, you try not to take it personally. It's 1837, you're still fresh to the throne, and rebellion is already knocking on your colonial doorstep. Canada, your snowy, maple-scented cousin across the Atlantic, is restless. Too British for comfort, too French to forget, and too cold for just about anything else. And now it's asking hard questions about self-government, independence, and whether the empire's embrace feels a little too much like a headlock. Technically, Canada is two colonies at this point, Upper and Lower Canada. The upper part is mostly British settlers. Lower Canada is largely French-speaking, with Catholic traditions and a proud cultural identity. They've been under British rule since 1763 and, well, they're still not thrilled about it. The local governments are little more than rubber stamp assemblies under the thumb of a British-appointed governor, and when people complain, they're ignored. For years. So eventually they stop asking nicely. The Lower Canada Rebellion kicks off in 1837. Led by Louis-Joseph Papineau and his Patriot movement, it's less muskets and more frustrated speeches at first, but then shots are fired, and the British military responds with force. Meanwhile, in Upper Canada, a separate group led by William Lyon Mackenzie launches its own uprising. It's short-lived, clumsy, but loud enough that people back in London, you specifically, are forced to pay attention. You don't get personally involved in the crackdowns, but the reports reach your desk stacked high with the usual bureaucratic panic. Rebellion, sedition, a dangerous appetite for democracy. Still, even in your early years, you're not one to dismiss unrest entirely. Instead of punishing everyone into silence, you approve a new direction. Enter Lord Durham. He's your emissary, sent to figure out what the colonies actually want. His report is a turning point. He recommends responsible government and the union of the two Canadas into one. It's not independence, not yet, but it's a nudge towards self-rule. And you allow it. Not enthusiastically, but strategically. You know that a stable colony is better than a rebellious one, and Canada, with its timber, fur and sprawling potential, is far too valuable to lose. So in 1841, the two colonies are united into the province of Canada. You later oversee, through layers of ministers and officials, a steady loosening of the reins. Canada gets more autonomy. British-appointed governors still exist, but local legislatures gain power. Bit by bit, the idea of Canadian identity begins to take shape, even under your shadow. And then there's the French question, always simmering. The French Canadians want to keep their language, their religion, their culture. Many of your subjects back home see them as a problem to be anglicised. You, oddly enough, don't. You believe in loyalty over uniformity. If they obey the crown, you're content to let them keep their rosaries and croissants. This tolerance wins you some grudging affection in Quebec. Over time, Canada becomes your good child. Unlike Ireland, always on the verge of revolt, or India, where resistance boils just under the surface, Canada evolves into the model dominion. Loyal, proud, mostly self-governed. In 1867, you approve the British North America Act, and suddenly, Canada is a confederation. One country, with its own parliament and prime minister. Not a republic, not fully independent, but a partner, a dominion. It's a quiet revolution. No guillotines, no tea tossed into harbours, just a slow, snowy reshuffling of power. And you adapt. You begin treating Canada not just as a colony, but as part of the family. You write letters to Canadian leaders. You send your children on royal tours. You receive maple syrup and snowshoes as gifts and pretend to be delighted. A quirky moment. In 1860, your son, Prince Albert Edward, soon to be Edward VII, becomes the first royal to tour Canada. The trip is a hit. He's welcomed with parades, dinners, and the kind of excitement normally reserved for shiploads of sugar or miracle cures. The Canadians love him. Which is funny because you do not. Not at that point. You think Bertie is lazy, indulgent, and unfit to rule. But Canada doesn't see that. They see a prince, a symbol, a future king walking their muddy roads in formal shoes. It's endearing in its way. But your relationship with Canada isn't all snowy romance. Tensions still flare, especially with the United States looming to the south, like a noisy, rebellious neighbour who won't stop throwing barbecues and trying to annex things. During the American Civil War, you stay officially neutral, but many in your empire quietly root for the South, not because of slavery, which Britain had abolished decades earlier, but because a divided America is safer for Canada, less of a threat. You never say this aloud, of course, but you keep a close eye on the border. Then there's the Fenian raids, strange little incursions by Irish-American groups who believe that attacking Canada might somehow lead to Irish independence. It's not a great plan, but it scares people. It reminds you that the Empire's enemies aren't always far away. Sometimes they're just across a frozen river. You respond the way you always do, with calm, symbolic action. You approve defensive measures. You issue medals. You keep your distance emotionally, but remain very much present in the official record. Canadians notice. They begin calling you our queen, not out of obligation, but out of something closer to affection. And here's where it gets quietly brilliant. By allowing Canada more autonomy, you bind it more tightly to you. The less you squeeze, the more loyal it becomes. You don't fight to keep them under thumb. You let them build their own institutions, their own flags, their own identity, under your crown. You're especially pleased when Canadian soldiers march under your banner in imperial conflicts. They fight in the Boer War. They drill with British troops. They volunteer unasked when imperial pride is on the line. It touches you, really. You feel that this distant country, this icy outpost, chose you. And that's a kind of loyalty that can't be forced. A fun detail, you never visit Canada, not once. You always say you mean to. But the cold, the logistics, your health, it just never happens. Still, your presence is everywhere. Cities are named after you. Victoria, Regina, even Vancouver's fancy island. Mountains, lakes, statues, you're etched into their geography, and you love it. Today, scholars call Canada your quiet success. No dramatic declarations, no broken treaties, well, fewer than usual. Just a slow, steady transformation from colony to dominion. You didn't fight to keep control. You adapted. That's rare for a monarch. Even rarer for one who dressed like mourning was a sport. And as you sit at your desk, a letter arrives, written in elegant script, signed by the Prime Minister of Canada, thanking you for your reign, your leadership, your patience. You smile. A rare thing these days. Canada didn't break away. It walked ahead, and you miraculously chose to walk with it. Australia is never supposed to be a shining jewel in your crown. Honestly, it starts out more like a dusty punishment, a nowhere land, far enough away from everything else that no one minds shipping criminals there by the boatload. It's 1788 when the first fleet arrives at Botany Bay, long before your time on the throne, but by the time you inherit the empire, Australia has already become a strange contradiction. Part prison colony, part paradise, and very much British, whether the local wildlife approves or not. When you ascend the throne in 1837, there are 6 separate British colonies spread across the continent: New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia and Tasmania, which they used to call Van Diemen's Land, but decided that sounded a little too much like a Gothic novel. Each colony is its own entity, with its own governor, its own troubles, and its own dreams of either gold, wool, or not dying from heat stroke. They're united mainly by distance from London and a stubborn attachment to tea. The first thing that defines your Australian reign is the tail end of the penal era. Transportation of convicts winds down during your early years, but it leaves a complicated legacy. Tens of thousands of people were sent here in chains, often for petty crimes, stealing a handkerchief, poaching a rabbit, being Irish. But when their sentences end, many stay. They become farmers, shopkeepers, bushrangers, and the proud ancestors of people who, generations later, will claim they never had convicts in the family with suspicious enthusiasm. You never visit, but you keep a quiet curiosity about Australia. Reports reach you through governors and explorers. They describe bizarre animals, kangaroos, wombats, emus. You receive gifts of eucalyptus, strange beetles, aboriginal weapons, and once a live lyrebird that mimicked human speech so well it scared your ladies-in-waiting half to death. You keep it for a time, in one of your menageries. Australia feels like another planet, but it's your planet. And then, the gold hits. In the 1850s, prospectors strike gold in Victoria and New South Wales, and suddenly, the sleepy colony turns into a mud-splattered frenzy of shovels, tents, and wild ambition. People flood in, not just from Britain, but from China, America, Ireland, Germany. Ballarat and Bendigo swell with desperate men panning for dreams. Fortunes are made and lost between sunrise and supper. It's chaotic, violent, unforgettable. The gold rush does something incredible. It transforms Australia from a forgotten outpost into a buzzing frontier of opportunity. It also gives birth to new myths. The rebellious digger, the rugged bushman, the land of mateship and second chances. Australians begin forging an identity that's proudly scruffy and vaguely allergic to authority. They still swear loyalty to you, of course. Your face is on their coins, but they're also not above using that coin to buy rum before 10 a.m. and throw it at a lamppost in protest. One of the most dramatic examples of this rebellious streak comes in 1854 at the Eureka Stockade. Gold miners, fed up with taxes and licensing fees, build a barricade, raise a flag, and declare defiance. The British troops respond the way they always do, decisively and with gunpowder. The rebellion is crushed, but the idea takes root. Australians start to see themselves not just as subjects, but as something else. Citizens, maybe. Something more independent than your average colony. You hear about Eureka in the official reports. It's softened by the time it reaches your desk, framed as an unfortunate disturbance. But the undercurrent is there. Australia is growing up. It wants to make its own rules. Not leave the empire, not yet, but certainly. Loosen the corset strings a bit, and you allow it, carefully, quietly. You approve the gradual introduction of self-government. Each colony begins forming its own elected parliament. You retain the power to appoint governors and veto laws, but you don't often interfere. You trust them to handle their own affairs, as long as they keep flying the Union Jack and sending wool and gold back to Britain. There's a quirky little detail here. Australians develop an almost obsessive love for naming things after you. Victoria becomes not just a name, but an entire colony. Then there's Queensland, named in your honour. Dozens of towns, rivers, lakes and mountains get the royal stamp. Adelaide, named for your aunt. Perth, rebranded under your reign. And hundreds of streets, schools and parks, all carrying your name or the names of your children. It's a kind of imperial flattery by geography. You don't ask for it, but you don't object. Why would you? But there's also a darker side to this sunny narrative. You receive occasional reports, often vague, often filtered, about the Aboriginal people, about frontier violence, displacement, disease, resistance. Words like trouble and unrest are used in official language, but between the lines, it's clear. Colonization has devastated indigenous communities. Entire cultures are being erased, languages silenced, people driven off their land, settlers spread across the continent, backed by laws written for someone else's world, and the people who've lived there for tens of thousands of years are given no say in the matter. Do you know? Do you care? Historians still debate this. You speak now and then about civilizing the native people, always from a paternalistic Christian perspective. You likely believe that the empire is improving their lives, but improvement in this case means subjugation. The full brutality of the frontier wars and the stolen generations won't come to light until long after your death. But the roots are here, during your reign, in your name. Still, to most Australians, you remain a beloved figure. They decorate town halls with your portrait. They toast you on your birthday. When federation is proposed, uniting all 6 colonies into one nation, you quietly support it. You don't live to see it finalised in 1901, but it's done in your name. The new country will be called the Commonwealth of Australia, and it will recognise you, Queen Victoria, as its first sovereign. It's a strange inheritance. You never set foot there. You never heard the accent, never walked its beaches, never felt its fierce sun. And yet, your name is burned into its soil, stitched into its lore, carved into sandstone and marble from Perth to Sydney. You are, for better or worse, part of the land. Australia becomes one of your great imperial contradictions, built on independence yet wrapped in monarchy, proudly British but increasingly its own creature. You don't control it, tightly. You just cast a long shadow, and under that shadow a nation begins to form. One day, long after you're gone, Australians will debate whether to cut ties with the Crown, whether to keep your descendants or stand alone. But for now they remain, rowdy, sunburned, and still stubbornly yours. You've always said you love the Irish, and in your mind maybe you do. But love, as Ireland learns during your reign, doesn't fill bellies or stop bullets. It doesn't preserve language or protect land. And when love comes wrapped in imperial control, it's hard to tell whether it's love at all or just another kind of leash. Ireland is the bruised sibling in your imperial family. Close, loud, unpredictable, and never quite forgiven for wanting to be free. When you take the throne in 1837, Ireland is already simmering. The Act of Union in 1801 has legally bound it to Great Britain, creating the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. In theory, it's one kingdom, one parliament, one monarch. But in practice, Ireland is treated like the problematic cousin everyone keeps inviting to dinner, only because they have to. It's a country of deep cultural pride and historic wounds, and under your rule, those wounds split wide open. The defining trauma of your relationship with Ireland is the Great Famine. It begins in 1845, when a potato blight devastates the primary food source for millions of poor Irish peasants. Over the next 6 years, more than 1 million people die of starvation or disease. Another 1 million emigrate, many never to return. Entire villages empty, families vanish. And the empire, your empire, responds with a mixture of half-hearted charity and fatal bureaucracy. You're aware, of course. The reports flood in. Newspaper articles, letters from Irish leaders, desperate pleas for help. You donate $2,000 of your own money, one of the largest individual donations of the time. You write that you're deeply affected by the suffering. You even encourage other aristocrats to contribute, but it's not enough. Nowhere near. The British government's response is painfully slow, entangled in ideology. Many in Parliament believe in laissez-faire economics, and they argue that interfering too much might damage the market. Some officials, with astonishing cruelty, suggest the famine is nature's way of correcting overpopulation. Relief programs are underfunded, soup kitchens are shut down, food is exported from Ireland even as people starve in the fields. And through all of this, your face remains on the coins, your name on every law, your crown over every official seal. You don't cause the famine, but your empire fails catastrophically to prevent it, or even to treat it with dignity. In the collective Irish memory, this is not just a natural disaster. It's an act of imperial neglect, a national betrayal. You visit Ireland for the first time in 1849, at the height of the famine. It's supposed to show solidarity, a kind of royal reassurance that you see their pain. But you don't see much, really. The visit is tightly controlled. You travel by rail and carriage, protected from the starving crowds. You wave from balconies and attend well-manicured events. Some cheer because you are the Queen, and that still means something. But many stay silent. Their sons are on coffin ships bound for America. Their daughters are buried in mass graves. After that, your relationship with Ireland becomes even more complicated. You continue to insist you love the country, especially its music, its scenery, its charm. You frequently hire Irish servants. You express sympathy during rebellions and uprisings. But Ireland doesn't want your sympathy. It wants autonomy. And it keeps asking for it, louder and louder. The Home Rule movement begins to take shape in the latter half of your reign, demanding that Ireland be allowed to govern itself, at least partially. Not independence, not revolution, just a parliament in Dublin, controlling Irish affairs while still remaining under your crown. It sounds reasonable. But your government, especially the Conservative side, wants nothing to do with it. They fear it will lead to full separation. And you agree. You don't like Home Rule, you don't trust it. You write privately that it would weaken the empire, set a dangerous precedent. Ireland, in your view, must remain united with Britain. Anything less would be disloyal, disrespectful. And while you never publicly campaign against it, your influence is felt in the political hesitation that surrounds every Home Rule bill. Parliament debates it. The press rages about it. The Irish people march for it. But it never quite passes, not during your lifetime. And there's violence. Always there's violence. The Fenians, Irish nationalists seeking full independence, bomb British cities, attack police, and even attempt to assassinate Prince Alfred, one of your sons, during his visit to Australia. The press paints them as terrorists. You call them wicked men in your letters. But the anger behind their actions is not baseless. It's born of centuries of land theft, religious persecution, and famine. Still, you see only the chaos, not the cause. In 1882, your Chief Secretary for Ireland, Lord Frederick Cavendish, is murdered in Phoenix Park, Dublin, by members of a nationalist splinter group. You are horrified, disgusted. You call it a brutal outrage, and it is. But again, the political response is harsh and sweeping. New coercion acts are passed, Irish civil liberties shrink, the government tightens its grip, and Ireland in turn pulls away further. Still, there are moments of connection. You return to Ireland in 1861, and again in 1900. During your final visit, you are greeted by massive crowds. Some are there out of genuine loyalty, others because the visit brings spectacle and attention. You ride in a carriage through Dublin streets, watching the sea of green flags and tricolour ribbons. You're old now, shrunken, dressed in black, and the people cheer for a woman they know will not return again. It's a strange, final moment of uneasy affection between monarch and country. One strange detail. During this 1900 visit, you wear a shamrock on your cloak, a quiet nod to Irish nationalism, or perhaps just to local fashion. Either way, the gesture is noticed. It's small, symbolic, and too late to undo the pain, but it lingers in photographs and memory. Modern scholars argue about your stance on Ireland. Some say you are more sympathetic than your ministers, but powerless to change policy. Others say you are stubbornly attached to an outdated vision of empire that couldn't make room for Irish self-rule. Perhaps both are true. You wanted loyalty. Ireland wanted justice. The two rarely aligned. You lived through multiple Irish uprisings. You signed off on countless Irish laws. You buried victims of Irish violence. And you buried subjects who died because your government failed them. You believed to the end that Ireland should remain a proud part of your kingdom. But Ireland by then was only proud of itself. As you sit at Windsor in your final years, wrapped in layers of blackened memory, you still receive letters from Irish children. Some thank you, some beg for help, some ask for freedom. You read them, and then, like always, you return to your diary, where your words are private, and your empire remains whole, if only on paper. You don't wake up one morning and decide to become Empress of India. That sort of title isn't brewed overnight, like tea or gossip. It grows, swells, insists on itself, like so much of your empire, until it becomes not just inevitable, but official, And once it does, your world changes. India, the empire's glittering obsession, becomes more than just a colony. It becomes your second soul, your adopted kingdom, your burden, your prize, your myth. It's 1876 when the title is formally offered. The man behind it, unsurprisingly, is your most enthusiastic and exhausting Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli. He's charming, theatrical, maddening in that way only truly confident men are. You find his flattery oddly satisfying. He tells you what you want to hear, that you're not merely Queen of Britain, but sovereign over one of the most ancient and powerful civilizations on Earth. Why shouldn't you be called Empress? You hesitate briefly. The optics are tricky. Britain doesn't traditionally go in for the whole emperor business. That's more of a continental thing, French or Roman or something you'd expect from a man with a laurel wreath and a superiority complex. But India is different. It feels different. Older. Other. And besides, the title wouldn't apply to Britain itself, just to India, just to a place where monarchs are still sacred, so you agree. In 1876, Parliament passes the Royal Titles Act, and you officially become Empress of India. The title is announced with fanfare, public celebrations, a sea of trumpets and bunting, and yet you never set foot on the subcontinent. You rule India from a distance, thousands of miles filtered through viceroys, governors, military officers, and a pile of letters so thick it could stop a cannonball. Still, you try to understand it. You surround yourself with artifacts, textiles, portraits, strange instruments, ivory carvings, tigers stuffed mid-roar. You read about Hindu gods and Mughal emperors. You decorate your halls with Indo-Gothic flair. You commission photographs of Indian temples and ask endless questions no one wants to answer honestly. But your relationship with India is built less on knowledge and more on longing. After Albert dies, India becomes a kind of spiritual distraction. You fill your palaces with its echoes. You hire Indian servants. You fall under the spell of curry and mango chutney, and names you can barely pronounce but love writing in cursive. And then, of course, there's him, Abdul Karim, a low-ranking Indian Muslim clerk sent from Agra to serve you during your Golden Jubilee in 1887. He's meant to be ornamental, part of the pageantry. But somehow he becomes indispensable. He speaks to you plainly. He listens without flinching. He teaches you Urdu, offers stories of India beyond the official versions. You call him the Munshi, and you trust him in a way that confuses and enrages everyone around you. Your court hates him. Your family despises him. They say he's using you, manipulating you. They try to send him home. They hide letters. They poison your perception. But you don't care. Abdul is yours. He reminds you that there's still more to learn, more to feel, even in your twilight years. He sits with you when no one else will. You dine together. You walk in the gardens. He reads the Quran aloud, and though you don't convert, you listen with reverence. It's scandalous. It's touching. It's complicated. And it tells the world something you rarely say out loud. That you see India not just as territory, but as real, alive, human. But that realization arrives late, long after the damage has been done. Because the truth is, India has already bled for your empire. During the 1857 rebellion, what the British call the Sepoy Mutiny and Indians call the First War of Independence, your soldiers, your empire, crush an uprising that could have changed everything. You weren't in India then, but your name was stamped on every rifle, every death sentence, every reprisal. It starts with a cartridge. Rumours spread that the new Enfield rifle cartridges are greased with pig and cow fat, offensive to both Muslims and Hindus. Soldiers, or sepoys, refuse to use them. The British react with typical subtlety. They imprison the protesters. Revolt breaks out. It spreads like fire, from Meerut to Delhi, Kanpur to Lucknow. Old Mughal princes are pulled from retirement. Ancient loyalties are tested. British civilians are killed. So are thousands of Indians. The British response is swift and merciless. Villages are burned, rebels executed en masse. The scale of retribution is staggering, and when it ends, the British East India Company is dissolved and direct rule passes to the crown, to you. From 1858 onward, India becomes your official responsibility. You appoint a viceroy. You oversee from afar the world's largest colony, a patchwork of princely states, British provinces, and contradictions so vast they make London look quaint. You write grand proclamations to the Indian people, promising justice, religious tolerance, equality under the law. You ban the worst abuses, child sacrifice, sati, thuggy cults. You believe the British are bringing order, and maybe you are. But order often comes dressed in arrogance. Railways are built, but only for British efficiency. Education is offered, but in English. Justice is enforced, but rarely fairly. India becomes a study in control. It's both centrepiece and cautionary tale. You see the jewels, the palaces, the pomp. You don't see the famines that kill millions, the taxes that wring every last coin from farmers, the slow erosion of old systems, replaced with bureaucratic hierarchies no one understands. One of the quirkiest aspects of your Indian rule is the pageantry. The Durbar of 1877, staged by Viceroy Lytton to celebrate your new title. You don't attend, of course, but you're the star all the same. The event is held in Delhi. Thousands of tents, elephants in gold-plated armour, Maharajas bowing in embroidered robes. It's imperial theatre at its peak. A staged reminder that the sun never sets on your authority. Back in Britain, the public loves it. The papers print engravings of jewelled Indian princes kneeling before portraits of you. The message is clear. Victoria reigns even in the East. And yet, resistance never dies. Indian intellectuals begin writing about nationalism. Educated in your schools, fluent in your language, they start asking uncomfortable questions. If liberty is so cherished, why is it withheld? If you love India, why not trust it to govern itself? You never answer directly. You never really have to. You're an empress, and the empire is not a debate. It's a reality, painted red and ringing with bells and bugles. Even so, in your private thoughts, in your letters to Abdul, maybe you suspect something's shifting, that India won't be held forever, that the young men reading Dickens and Darwin in Bombay will one day want something more than decorative titles and half-promises. But for now, you rule. From Windsor, from Osborne, through intermediaries and emissaries and the soft power of your signature. India is yours. Its princes send you tigers. Its poets write you odes. Its soil produces the diamonds in your crown. You are empress, not by birth, not by conquest, but by proclamation. And for the moment, that is enough. By now you've ruled so long that even your enemies are starting to look tired. Decades have passed. Prime ministers have come and gone, some with flair, some with headaches, most with a bottle of something strong hidden in their desk. You've outlasted revolution, rebellion, the telegraph, the railway, and your own ability to comfortably button your own shoes. You've buried your husband, several of your children, your mother, and countless advisors. And still, somehow, you're the constant. But not even monarchs are immune to time. Your face, once round and soft, has become sharp and heavy with the weight of mourning. The black lace never leaves your wardrobe. The public, once sceptical, now sees you as a sort of eternal widow queen. They send you letters, gifts, drawings from school children that say things like, "God save our granny." You've become a kind of national grandmother, remote, revered, and slightly terrifying. And nowhere is that transformation more visible than during your jubilees, those grand anniversaries of your reign, where your empire shows itself off in polished boots and cannon salutes. The first is your Golden Jubilee in 1887, marking 50 years on the throne. It's glittering, loud, and utterly overwhelming. You're reluctant at first. All that public affection makes you nervous. What if they cheer for the wrong reason? What if they don't cheer? But they do. They cheer so loudly the sound might have woken up Albert. Crowds line the streets of London as you ride in your open carriage, the streets draped in bunting and flags. Dignitaries come from every corner of your empire, princes from India, Maori chiefs from New Zealand, diplomats from Africa, soldiers from Canada and Australia. Even your own children, for once, behave and show up looking like people you might actually be proud of. You sit through endless speeches. Everyone says the same things: longevity, dignity, national pride. You pretend to enjoy it. You even smile once or twice, but your real feeling is harder to name, somewhere between exhaustion and awe. Because here it is. Proof. You did it. Half a century on the throne. Most monarchs die or go mad before that milestone. You just kept going. Still, not everything is golden under the glitter. Behind the celebration, the political climate is shifting. The Irish are still pressing for home rule. Workers are organising, trade unions are gaining power. Women, those wonderfully persistent creatures, are beginning to demand the vote. Loudly. You don't support them, of course. You believe women have a role, but it isn't at the ballot box. Mad, wicked folly, you call it. And you say so, very firmly in a letter. That quote will come back to haunt you. And yet, you do support education for girls, and charity work, and women being intelligent, as long as they aren't too visible about it. You're a contradiction in a corset, just like your empire, empowering in some ways, deeply conservative in others. Feminists of the future will argue over you endlessly. Some will call you a symbol of strength, others a symbol of everything that held women back. In truth, you're neither. You're just you, stubborn, devoted, unmoving. 10 years later, in 1897, your Diamond Jubilee arrives, 60 years on the throne. Now you're 78, slower, heavier, increasingly wheelchair-bound, and still swaddled in black. But the Empire wants to celebrate, and you, finally, seem to enjoy the idea. Maybe because this time, the celebration feels more like a farewell tour. Everyone knows you won't see another 10 years. You might not even see another 5. The parade is bigger, the crowd's larger. Troops from across the Empire march down the streets of London. Zulu warriors, Canadian Mounties, Indian cavalry, all moving in perfect step before your weary eyes. The whole spectacle is designed not just to honour you, but to flex the Empire, to show the world what 60 years of your reign has built, a quarter of the globe, under one crown. And as you sit on your throne that day, surrounded by royalty, generals, bishops and prime ministers, something stirs in you, something not quite pride, but not far off. Because this empire, for all its faults, is extraordinary. You've overseen an age of staggering expansion, of invention, connection and contradiction. The telegraph, the telephone, electric lights, steamships, railways, photography. All of it has bloomed under your watch. London has become the beating heart of a machine that touches every continent. People cheer you, yes, but they're also cheering the myth of empire, the illusion of unity, the spectacle of it all. Of course, behind the flags and the fireworks, the seams are fraying. Boer unrest is stirring again in South Africa. India is rumbling with nationalist movements. Ireland is still divided, and Britain itself is changing. Working-class voices are rising, and the nobility's grip is loosening. One odd moment sticks with you from the Jubilee. A group of Indian soldiers, impeccably dressed, bow before you, their faces unreadable. You look into their eyes and wonder what they truly think. Are they proud to serve, or simply surviving? Do they see you as a benevolent empress, or the figurehead of an oppressive regime? You'll never know. But the question lingers longer than the applause, and through it all, your health continues to slide. Your legs ache, your eyesight fades. The doctors give you their usual evasions. Rest, Your Majesty, as if that will rewind time. You stop travelling. You stay mostly at Osborne House, your retreat on the Isle of Wight. You surround yourself with familiar things, photographs of your grandchildren, stacks of letters, the steady presence of Abdul Karim, though even he begins to age now. You write in your diary every day, your handwriting trembling, your words still sharp. And even as your body weakens, your presence remains enormous. Children still curtsy when they pass your portrait in school. Newspapers still refer to you as Her Most Gracious Majesty. You've become, somehow, beyond criticism, beyond politics. You're a fact, a force of nature. People are born and die and marry and divorce under your watch, and they assume you'll always be there. The way they assume Big Ben will always chime or the Thames will always flow. There's an eerie comfort in it, but also a tension, because history, like all things, must move. And no reign, no matter how vast or symbolic, can last forever. So in these final years you begin tying knots. You correspond with your many, many grandchildren. You try to keep track of their marriages, their scandals, their ambitions. You broker alliances through blood. Your descendants now sit on the thrones of Germany, Russia, Romania, Spain, Greece. Europe is a family affair. You're called the grandmother of Europe. And it's not a compliment so much as a geopolitical observation. But blood ties don't always prevent bloodshed. The seeds of future wars are already planted. Your grandchildren will one day lead armies against each other, and the empire you've built will shudder beneath the weight of mechanized death. You won't live to see it. Thank heaven for that. But the world you leave behind is already preparing to burn. Still, for now, you are the monarch of peace, of permanence, of black crepe and endless anniversaries. And when you roll through London during your Diamond Jubilee, waving weakly from your open carriage, the people cheer, because they see not just a queen, but a century made flesh. Time for you has always been measured in letters, not hours. Each day brings a fresh pile of correspondence, some official, some personal, some barely legible under the smudged ink of distant hands. You answer as many as you can. Even now, in the brittle twilight of your reign, your fingers curled with arthritis, your thoughts fogging at the edges, you still pick up the pen. Writing, in a way, is your final act of control. It's early 1901, and your rooms at Osborne House are quiet. Too quiet. The staff steps softly. Voices are hushed. Your doctors whisper to each other behind doors. They know, even if you won't admit it aloud, your body is failing. You are dying. But dying is complicated when you're Queen Victoria, Empress of India, mother to 9 children, grandmother to 42, ruler of a quarter of the planet. You don't just slip away. You decline, like an empire. And even now, as your strength falters, the empire does not stop moving. In South Africa, the Second Boer War rages on. You're too tired to read all the reports, but you catch the headlines. British soldiers fighting Dutch settlers, scorched earth policies, concentration camps. Yes, camps. Thousands of Boer women and children rounded up behind barbed wire. Disease spreads. Hunger spreads. You never called for this, but your name is on the orders. Your generals speak of strategy. The newspapers speak of victory. But what's left behind isn't triumph. It's smoke and silence. Your youngest son, Arthur, visits the front. He returns grim and older than before. You ask him gently if it's as bad as they say. He hesitates, then nods. And still, the Empire expects you to bless it, to smile, to endure. You do your best. You can no longer stand for long periods, so audiences are shortened. You sit in your drawing room like a faded photograph, still regal, but ghostly. When ministers visit, they are struck by how small you've become, how your famous presence now flickers like a candle at the bottom of its wick, but your eyes still snap with intelligence when something interests you. And what interests you, oddly enough, is routine. The same tea at the same time, the same letters from your daughters, the same sharp annoyance at being reminded to rest. Even now, you do not like being told what to do. Your Munshi, Abdul Karim, is still with you. Less in the limelight now, your family has all but banished him from court affairs. But he remains your companion. You have him moved nearby in the servants' quarters at Osborne so he can visit daily. The sight of him comforts you. He reads you poetry in Urdu. You don't understand all the words anymore, but the cadence is familiar. Soothing. Your family dislikes this arrangement, but you don't care. You haven't cared for years. The only thing that unsettles you now is how easily the world is preparing to move on. You overhear whispers. Who will take the throne? What will change? Your heir, Albert Edward, Bertie, as you still somewhat wearily call him, is nearly 60. A professional disappointment for most of his life, in your eyes. Too fond of champagne and chorus girls. Too lazy. Too modern. But he's softened in age. You've come to tolerate him. Even trust him. In small doses. He is, after all, the only one left who knows what it means to have grown up in Albert's shadow. You call him to your side in mid-January. He travels to Osborne, as do the rest of your children. Your daughters gather like mourning doves. Your favourite grandsons kneel beside you. For once, the family isn't bickering. They know what this is. The Queen is dying. You drift in and out. Sleep takes longer each day, deeper, heavier. You stop writing. You stop walking. You stop eating, then drinking. There's no pain, Not really, just a kind of loosening. Your skin grows pale, your hands cooler, you recognize less, you speak less. The doctors can't do much but watch. And then, on January 22nd, 1901, in the late evening, surrounded by your children, your physicians, and the fading gold of your reign, you let go. You were 81 years old. The moment your heart stops, the empire feels it. In ships and shanties, in drawing rooms and barracks. Telegrams fly in every direction. The Queen is dead. Some read it and weep. Others fold the note, pause, and look out the window. People didn't always love you, but they always knew you. You were there, always, a certainty. Now the certainty is gone. Your body is laid out at Osborne House in a white dress, not black for once, with your wedding veil still carefully preserved. You requested it years ago, a small final devotion to Albert. A lock of his hair is tucked into your hand, so is a picture of John Brown, the Highland servant you loved in your own complicated way. Abdul's letters are quietly removed by your family. They want the world to remember the Queen, not the woman. The funeral is a thing of imperial precision. Your coffin is loaded onto a gun carriage, escorted by soldiers from every corner of the world. Indians in turbans, Canadians in fur-lined uniforms, Australians bronzed by sun. You are carried by sailors, not horses, because the horses spooked during rehearsal. It feels symbolic somehow. This weight of empire borne not by beasts, but by men trained to hold a ship steady in any storm. You are buried next to Albert in the Frogmore Mausoleum at Windsor. It is quiet, cold. You're finally side by side again after 40 years apart. And then, life continues. Bertie becomes Edward VII. He wastes no time modernising the monarchy. The mourning curtains are pulled down, the court wears colour again, the Edwardian age begins. Brighter, brasher, looser than yours. You're spoken of with reverence, almost superstition. Statues of you go up in Delhi, Sydney, Hong Kong, Nairobi, Toronto. Your face remains on coins for a while, but the world is changing fast. Within a generation, everything you knew will be gone. The Great War will rip through Europe, pitting your grandchildren against each other. The empire will fracture, monarchies will fall. Your own great-grandson will be executed in a basement in Russia. And people will wonder, did Queen Victoria build the modern world or merely preside over its most fragile illusion? But those questions belong to history. You belong to memory, to the scent of old letters, the rustle of heavy silk, the faint scratch of a diary quill, the echo of hoofbeats outside Buckingham Palace. You are the end of something, the beginning of something else. You were crowned a girl, ruled as a widow, and died a legend. And even now, in the flicker of gaslight and the rustle of empire, the world still dreams of you. Long after you're gone, the myth of you only grows. You become an adjective, Victorian, that attaches itself to furniture, morals, architecture, even underwear. An entire era wears your name like a second skin. But the truth, as always, is messier than the legacy. You weren't just lace doilies and repression. You were contradiction wrapped in crepe, an empress obsessed with humility, a widow with global power, a woman who ruled an age that wasn't built for her to rule at all. The Victorian age is carved into timelines and textbooks, boxed neatly between the fall of Napoleon and the rise of machine guns. It becomes synonymous with empire, with industry, with the stiff upper lip. But beneath the labels, the monuments, the History Channel dramatizations, you remain elusive, human. In the decades after your death, the world rushes forward like it's been unshackled. Edward, your son, ascends the throne with a cigar in one hand and modernity in the other. He throws off your mourning like a damp cloak. Court protocol loosens. The arts begin to breathe again. He loves fast horses, louder dinners, and people you would have dismissed as scandalous. But he also knows how to charm a room, how to navigate the new century. Your empire is still massive, still sprawled across continents, but there's a strange tremble beneath it now, like something too big for its frame. And while Edward smiles and poses, the world edges toward chaos. By 1914, the grandsons you once bounced on your knee are leading nations into war. Wilhelm of Germany, your prickly, insecure grandson, Nicholas of Russia, the mild-eyed Romanov, George of England, your own flesh and blood. They write letters to each other in the early days, signing them Nicky and Willie, like the war is just a misunderstanding over tea. But it's not. It's the end of the world you built. The First World War blows open the seams of your empire. British soldiers from India, Africa, Australia and Canada are pulled into Europe's trench-drenched nightmare. The empire you once ruled as a symbol of order becomes an engine of war. Your legacy, once etched in gold, now drips in mud. And yet, even in this grim new world, your name endures. People cling to it. Victorian becomes a word people use when they want to remember when things made sense, when manners mattered, when the Queen sat in black, dignified, eternal. They forget the hunger, the revolts, the wars fought under your banner. They remember the railways, the manners, the good old days. Nostalgia is funny like that. Here's a strange, almost comical quirk. Your image, once feared and revered, ends up on souvenir tea towels. Your silhouette becomes a brand. Victoria Sponge Cake, Queen Victoria Markets, Victoria Cross medals still awarded for valour. Entire cities, lakes and mountains carry your name. Children in countries you never visited go to schools named after you. You are everywhere and nowhere. But historians, those persistent creatures, aren't interested in myths. They dig. They examine your journals, your letters, your contradictions. Some are kind. They see a woman caught in a man's world, wielding power with restraint, burdened by grief. Others are harsher. They see a queen complicit in conquest, too distant to stop suffering, too attached to the idea of empire to question what it cost. One debate, still unresolved, is whether you were progressive for your time or simply well-meaning within a rigid system. You opposed slavery, spoke against racism in private letters, supported the education of girls, and maintained close friendships with people your court disapproved of. But you also rejected women's suffrage, upheld class divisions, and oversaw some of the most exploitative decades of British imperialism. You were a paradox, a mother to some, a colonizer to others, and your family, that tangled web of dynasties you spun like a cautious spider, well, it doesn't hold. The Russian Revolution sweeps away your Romanov grandchildren in a storm of blood and ice. The German monarchy collapses. Even the British royal family, to survive the anti-German sentiment, changes its name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to the more comfortably English Windsor. You would have hated that. All those generations of lineage flattened into a name that sounds like a biscuit. And yet, it works. The monarchy survives. Shrinks, but survives. Your great-grandson, George VI, becomes king during the Second World War. He fights not with weapons, but with radio broadcasts and quiet resolve. When London burns during the Blitz, he stays. The monarchy regains something it lost. Dignity, maybe. Purpose. Then comes her, Elizabeth II. Your great-great-granddaughter. A woman, again, on the throne. She's crowned in a ceremony you'd recognise, but the world around her is nothing like yours. Television, jet engines, decolonisation. The sun begins to set on your empire. India is free. Africa breaks its chains. Canada and Australia stand tall and separate. The red on the map bleeds away. And still, your portrait hangs in halls and heritage buildings. They call you the matriarch of modern monarchy. Your black dress is imitated on Remembrance Day. Your diaries become source material for TV dramas. Actors play you with winks and scowls. In some versions you're stern and wise. In others sharp-tongued and lovably awkward. You've become a character, a cultural shorthand, a symbol, not of power, but of history. In schoolbooks, they teach children about the Victorian age as a time of invention. The steam engine, the telephone, the postbox. You sitting at the centre of it all. Rarely moving, yet somehow always there. A human anchor during a century in motion. And people still visit your palaces. Windsor, Balmoral, Osborne. Peering at your rooms, your ink-stained writing desks, the flowers pressed between your diary pages. They read your love letters to Albert and feel something tender. Unexpected. They see your wedding veil, yellowed with age, and they understand. For all the crowns and speeches and cannons, you were a woman who lost the love of her life and never really came back from it. You see, that's the part history often forgets. You didn't want to rule. You didn't crave power. You were born into duty and did your best not to drop it. You survived childbirth, assassination attempts, rebellions, war, personal tragedy, and public scrutiny. And you stayed. For 63 years. Through lace and sorrow, through the rise of machines and the fall of empires, you were Queen Victoria, the woman behind the widow's veil, the empress who never saw her empire, the grandmother whose shadow still stretches across the map. And in the end, maybe that's enough. Not perfection, not sainthood, just endurance, just staying in the story long enough to become part of the legend. You're not here to witness it, of course, but the 20th century hits your empire like a runaway train. Fast, loud, uncontrollable. It smashes through the stonework you once believed unshakable, turns your once glorious maps into a jigsaw of new nations, and drags your descendants along for a ride they don't always enjoy. And as it races forward, spitting steam and modernity, the world begins to reckon with what, exactly, you left behind. At first, your empire tries to keep up. The British flag still flies in Africa, in Asia, over Caribbean islands and windswept outposts that haven't changed much since they were drawn into imperial orbit under your rule. Your successors still insist that Britain's role is civilizing, benevolent, enlightened. The usual lines, but the world isn't buying it anymore. Because after World War I, everything changes. That war, the one your grandchildren helped start with their tangled alliances and matching moustaches, rips the old order to shreds. 10 million dead. Empires collapsed. Monarchies dissolved like sugar cubes in boiling water. The Austro-Hungarians gone. The Ottomans gone. The Romanovs executed in a cellar. Only the British monarchy remains, and even it begins to tremble. The colonies start to notice that the empire's invincibility was perhaps just very good marketing. They had sent their sons to die in a European war, Indian sepoys, African riflemen, Australian and Canadian troops, and now they wonder what exactly they got in return. Gratitude? Hardly. Independence? Not yet. Your empire had always promised fairness, rule of law, a seat at the table, eventually. But eventually begins to feel suspiciously like never. So voices rise, movements form, flags are imagined before they are even stitched. In India, the independence movement finds its heartbeat in a man who wears no crown, carries no sword and marches barefoot through salt flats, Mahatma Gandhi. He returns from South Africa, inspired, infuriated, and determined to hold the empire to its promises, not with bullets, but with principle. His philosophy of non-violent resistance becomes both a moral challenge and a public relations nightmare for Britain. He refuses to stand when British officials enter a room. He spins his own cloth instead of buying imported textiles. He leads marches, hunger strikes, boycotts. And unlike past rebellions, this one doesn't burn down barracks. It exposes the rot from within. Back in London, your descendants don't quite know how to respond. There's no script for this. No uprising to crush. Just millions of people politely refusing to cooperate. Gandhi writes letters to the British Crown, including one to King George V, your grandson, beginning with "To one who has had the privilege of being born a subject." The tone is respectful, the content devastating. And eventually resistance becomes reality. In 1947, under your great-great-grandson George VI, India gains its independence, just like that. The brightest jewel in your crown, gone. But not quietly, because partition follows, India and Pakistan, sliced apart by religion, history and hurried colonial exits. The result is chaos, mass migration, ethnic violence. Whole trains full of corpses cross borders that didn't exist a year before. Over 1 million die. People wonder what it was all for, whether empire had ever truly meant progress, or just power, held too long by people too far away. Meanwhile, Africa watches. So does the Middle East, Southeast Asia. The idea that the British Empire is an unchanging benevolent institution begins to unravel. Each decade brings another flag lowered, another country stepping out from under the shadow of your statue. And let's talk about those statues. Your image, once cast in bronze and marble all over the globe, becomes a lightning rod. Some are vandalised, others quietly removed, A few are left standing, not as praise, but as caution, reminders of what imperial rule looked like when filtered through corsets and correspondence. One peculiar detail: in many of your colonial statues you're depicted seated, regally distant. One hand resting, the other gesturing vaguely towards some noble abstraction. Civilization, maybe, or order. But no one asks the locals how they interpret that gesture. It doesn't always mean what you thought it did. Yet even as decolonization accelerates, your legacy refuses to vanish entirely. The Commonwealth rises from the Empire's ashes, a voluntary association of former colonies, now independent nations tied together by history, language, and somehow still the British monarch. It's a strange creature, neither empire nor club, neither guilt nor pride. Just a lingering echo. And your name, of course, is everywhere. Queen Victoria Markets in Melbourne, Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, Victoria Island in Nigeria. These aren't just tourist traps. They're memory, etched into the geography of a world that once flew your flag. But the Commonwealth doesn't always feel common. Over time, it becomes clear that shared language and shared history aren't the same as shared purpose. Some countries remain in, others drift out. Some want to cut the final thread, become republics, remove the monarch as head of state. Barbados does it. Jamaica hints at it. Canada debates it with the polite intensity of a country that apologises after winning arguments. Even Britain begins to question its role. The empire that once boasted control over a quarter of the earth now struggles with its own borders. Scotland flirts with independence. Northern Ireland balances on the edge of old divisions. And England, well, England wonders if it was ever quite as noble as its textbooks claimed. Here's where it gets tricky. You, Queen Victoria, become a symbol for all of this. You didn't invent the empire, but you ruled during its peak. You didn't personally design the systems of oppression, but they matured under your reign. And so, people look to you, not as a villain, not quite, but as a mirror, a reflection of everything the empire wanted to believe about itself. Some defend you. They say you brought progress, railways, law, education. Others point to the costs, famines, massacres, cultural erasure. Both are right, both are incomplete, and that's the thing, isn't it? History doesn't work like a balance sheet. You can't tally up the good and subtract the bad to find your legacy score. The real story is in the contradiction. The empire you ruled brought both libraries and bullets, hospitals and humiliation, parliaments and prisons. Even now, in the 21st century, students debate you. Documentaries dissect you. Biographers circle your personality like archaeologists, trying to dig through the legend and find the woman beneath. Was she kind? Was she cold? Was she wise? Or simply stubborn? But perhaps the most telling question is this. Why are we still asking? Maybe because for all your complexity, you still represent something that never quite settled in our collective minds. Not just the British Empire, but the strange, intoxicating idea that power could be graceful, that expansion could be noble, that a widow in a bonnet could command half the planet by sheer force of decorum. It wasn't true. Not entirely, but it was persuasive. And in that persuasion you left your mark, not just on maps, but on minds. You're still here, in museums, in monuments, in the murmur of old hymns, in the distant names of places where you never stepped but ruled anyway. Your empire is gone, but your shadow, that's a harder thing to erase. In a strange twist of fate, you, the queen who rarely left her island and never stepped foot in most of the land she ruled, become in the end a global icon. And not just in the high halls of Parliament or behind velvet ropes in palace tours. No, you're everywhere. On biscuit tins, snow globes, Netflix thumbnails. You're the empress of pop culture now, which, honestly, is a realm far wilder than any colony your empire ever conquered. It starts subtly. A few books, a handful of biographies, historians flipping through your diaries like they're looking for buried treasure, or buried scandals. And then the flood begins. Paintings, statues, museum exhibits, then movies, plays, TV series, people playing you in increasingly elaborate costumes, waving gloved hands from balconies, practicing your famously short fuse and longer silences. Dame Judi Dench does it twice. Others follow. A parade of Victorias, some dignified, some dour, some delightfully sharp. Somewhere in the blur of candlelit reenactments and CGI palace shots, the real you starts to blur too. Were you a symbol of order, or a figurehead of repression? A loving mother, or a woman who barely tolerated most of her children? A feminist trailblazer, or an unintentional patriarch's puppet? The portrayals offer all versions, sometimes in the same scene, and the audience eats it up. The irony? You probably would have hated most of it. The public exposure, the dramatizations, the endlessly prying eyes. You were never fond of gossip nor amused by caricature. You once banned a book for simply being too nosy. And now, here we are, dramatizing your love letters, editing your grief for prime time, and arguing on Twitter about whether you were emotionally intelligent or just massively repressed. Yet you endure. You evolve. You've become a sort of historical ink blot. People see in you what they want to see. A symbol of old-world values, a cautionary tale about colonialism, a reminder that women can rule, but that they're judged even more fiercely when they do. You've been painted as saint, tyrant, mother, monster, icon, anachronism. Everyone has their Victoria. Even in education, your shadow lingers. Every British child learns your name by the time they're 10. The Victorian era is baked into school syllabi like a loaf of war bread. Dense, inevitable, a bit hard to swallow. Your image is in textbooks, right next to diagrams of the Industrial Revolution and photographs of soot-covered factory children. You represent progress, but also poverty, steam power and smog, childhood reform and child labour. Again, contradiction is the name of your game, but your story continues to stretch far beyond Britain's borders. In India, where you once ruled as empress, you're remembered with complicated feelings. Some still respect the historical weight of your reign. Others look at your statues and see only the long arm of colonisation, frozen in bronze. In South Africa, the Boer War scars remain, your name attached to a conflict that turned civilians into refugees in their own land. In Australia, you're part of the colonial legacy still being unpacked, examined and reckoned with. And then there's Canada, a place where your memory enjoys an oddly affectionate afterlife. Victoria Day is a national holiday, complete with fireworks and barbecues. You never visited once, but there you are, toasted beside burgers and hot dogs every May. It's charming if a bit surreal. You'd probably disapprove of the beer. Even your name, Victoria, still carries a strange gravitas. It's classic, regal, safe. Parents choose it for daughters, hoping to blend tradition with elegance. It pops up on ships, schools, tea sets, boutique hotels, overpriced skincare brands, and high-rise condos with bad insulation. You've become not just a monarch, but a brand. And your logo is permanence. But that's the thing about becoming history. You lose control of the narrative. You left behind reams of writing, but even that can't protect you from reinterpretation. People dig into your diary entries, your clipped margins, your underlined words, and extract theories like archaeologists with a bone and a thesis deadline. Some say you were a deeply feeling woman trapped by expectation. Others argue you were a shrewd political operator in a black dress. Some just note how frequently you use the word affectionate in your letters, and wonder if you were simply, well, touch-starved. The debates only grow as society changes. In recent years, as movements rise to challenge colonial history, your name often resurfaces. You're on banners, in books, in social media threads, where people debate whether your reign should be honoured or apologised for. Some demand your statues come down. Others argue that context matters, that you can't be judged by modern standards, that your reign was, for its time, progressive, even compassionate. But compassion is subjective, and legacy isn't a gentle thing. It's not a watercolour that fades quietly. It's a mural constantly painted over, layer by layer, with each generation's brush. And yet, curiously, you seem to survive the re-evaluations with your dignity intact. Perhaps because your story is so undeniably human. You weren't perfect, but you weren't robotic either. You loved fiercely, grieved endlessly, feared change even as you presided over an age defined by it. You were small and large at once, wrapped in lace, yet wrapped around the globe. One small, strange twist in your story. In your own time, you feared assassination. You survived multiple attempts. An anarchist here, a mentally ill man there, all testing the limits of your myth. But in the 21st century, you're bulletproof. Not in body, but in idea. A strange kind of immortality. You don't need guards or palaces anymore. You live in the folds of culture. You've passed beyond the need for survival, and the monarchy, it endures too. Through scandals and abdications, through global wars and tabloid splashes, it shrinks, it sways, it reinvents itself, but it remains. You helped forge that steel. You gave it time and tradition and rules so dense they practically calcified. And even now, your great-great-great-grandchildren sit on thrones and wave from carriages, bathed in ceremony that began under your eye. Your era, Victorian, no longer exists, but it still breathes. In the architecture of London, in the laws that shaped nations, in the etiquette books and fashion museums, in the nostalgia for a time that never really existed, except in curated memory. That's your real legacy. Not the crown, not the empire, not the statues or the titles. It's the idea that one person, dropped into a role at 18, terrified and underestimated, can stay the course long enough to reshape the world simply by enduring it. You weren't loud, you weren't flashy, you didn't give stirring speeches or lead armies into battle, but you lasted. 63 years of ruling, mourning, adapting and reigning. And maybe that's why, all these years later, people still tell your story. Not because you were flawless, but because you were real. And real, once wrapped in time and shadow and myth, becomes something close to unforgettable. If the world had kept still after your death, if it had paused, taken a breath, and politely walked into the future, you might have remained precisely what you were at the time of your funeral. The grandmother of Europe, the black-clad empress, the safe, stable shadow behind a gilded empire. But the world, as you may have suspected, does not do stillness. It spins faster, collapses harder, rebuilds messier. And what it does to your memory is something no queen, no matter how meticulous her daily journals, can fully control. At first, in the wake of your death, the empire digs in. It tries to hold itself together with brass buttons and administrative reports. It insists that your legacy means permanence, that your sons and grandsons will carry the torch of British dignity into the uncertain 20th century, one handshake and military parade at a time. But time, you'll learn, doesn't bend to legacy. It eats it. Within a decade of your burial, the First World War arrives like an uninvited guest with muddy boots and a machine gun. Your family is divided. Your grandson Wilhelm, leading Germany, sends troops against your other grandson George's British Empire. Your beloved granddaughter Alexandra, now Empress of Russia, is swallowed by revolution. The family bonds you spent decades strengthening with careful letters and arranged marriages are reduced to footnotes in telegrams that start with "regret to inform you." The empire survives the war, but not untouched. The cracks are there now, visible, undeniable. The colonies notice. The subjects who once marched for the crown begin to march against it. And with every protest, every rebellion, every independence movement, your name gets pulled into the conversation. You become the face of empire, even posthumously. In India, people burn your effigy during nationalist rallies. In Ireland, your statues are graffitied or toppled altogether, reminders of a crown that denied them self-rule. In Africa, the new generation looks at colonial maps and wonders why borders drawn in London should determine their futures. But despite the backlash, your image never disappears. If anything, it becomes more present, less as a person, and more as a symbol. A sort of shorthand for the age when Britain ruled everything from diamond mines to rainforests. Your statues may fall in one country but be restored in another. Schoolbooks revise your legacy every decade, flipping between reverence and criticism like a weather vane caught in empire's fading breeze. Meanwhile, in the arts and in culture, your name takes on a life of its own. Victorian becomes a descriptor of architecture, of morality, of a certain rigid, over-upholstered aesthetic. People imagine your era as a world of high collars, tight, corsets, foggy streets, and strict manners. The reality was always more layered, grimy, chaotic, radical in places. But that's not what survives. What survives is the look of it, the silhouette of you in mourning black, the idea of a time when rules mattered and the crown felt eternal. And somewhere along the way you become oddly fashionable again. The steampunk movement seizes on your era as inspiration, mixing Victorian design with sci-fi fantasy, Airships, brass goggles, mechanical hearts. They build imaginary futures rooted in your past, remixing your empire into something playful, rebellious, bizarre. You, Queen Victoria, become a character in alternate histories, dressed in cybernetic lace, flying through fictional skies on steam-powered thrones. You'd hate it. Or maybe deep down you'd be a little flattered. Even your diaries are reimagined. Modern readers comb through your entries, looking not for imperial policy, but emotional truth. They analyse your grief over Albert like a case study. Your affection for John Brown like a hidden romance. Your relationship with Abdul Karim becomes a subject of historical re-examination, post-colonial analysis, even cinematic drama. In a world that loves nuance more than ever, people begin to see you not as a one-note monarch, but as a layered figure, stoic on the outside, stormy within. They speculate, were you lonely? Yes. Were you in love with Albert? Of course. With John Brown? Possibly. With Karim? Who knows? And isn't that the fun of it? History doesn't need certainty. It needs curiosity. And you, O Queen, are still full of questions. But even with all this fascination, the core of your legacy remains tangled with empire. The places your rule touched are still living with the aftershocks, land disputes, linguistic divides, bureaucratic systems rooted in colonial administration, all traceable back to the machinery of British governance under your reign. Even as countries gain independence, they're often left wrestling with structures that were never built for their cultures, only for imperial convenience. And when people speak of decolonizing, they sometimes mention you, not with venom, necessarily, but with a need to untangle, to understand how the woman in black who mourned her husband also approved policies that devastated communities half a world away, to see how personal grief can coexist with institutional power, to reconcile the kindness in your private letters with the violence that accompanied your flag. These aren't easy reckonings, but they are necessary. Because for all your attempts to be the stable hand on the empire's wheel, the world under your rule was never truly stable. It was changing constantly, faster than even you could process. Technology accelerated, ideologies collided, nations rose and fell. And through it all, you tried to remain steady, immovable. You succeeded in your way. But the price of that steadiness was blindness to the tremors beneath your throne. Even now, in the age of satellites and social media, when people speak about Victorian values, they usually mean strict morality, gender roles, restraint. But they rarely mention the contradictions those values were built on. The hunger, the inequality, the factory smoke blackening every facade. You were the face of refinement and reform, and also the face on the coins funding colonial wars, a paradox encased in velvet. And so, your story continues to be rewritten. Some historians soften you, casting you as a victim of circumstance, a woman who did her best with the tools she was given. Others sharpen you, pointing out the moments when you could have intervened, when your signature meant more than symbolism. Both versions are true, neither is complete. Because in the end, history is not about tidy endings or clear judgments, it's about echo. And you, Queen Victoria, still echo. In the names of cities, in the architecture of parliaments, in the invisible lines that divide nations, and the visible ones that define society, in novels, in films, in debates about what power looks like when worn by a woman for too long. In the delicate lines of your handwritten diary, still read in hushed museum corners by people wondering what it felt like to carry the weight of the world and still end every night in silent prayer. You were the last monarch of your kind, and the first to become something else entirely. A relic, a brand, a question. You died over a century ago, and yet the world is still reacting to your presence, still wrestling with your absence, still figuring out who you were beneath the crown, beneath the mourning lace, beneath the myth. So now we've reached the edge of it, the last stretch of your long winding journey from Kensington Palace to Windsor, from a teen queen to the ghost of an era. We've followed your story through love and loss, parliaments and pageantry, India and Ireland, carriages and cannon fire. And even now, at the twilight of this tale, the world hasn't stopped asking what it all meant, what you meant. Because Queen Victoria isn't just a historical figure anymore. You're more than an entry on a royal family tree or a stamp on a letter from 1853. You're something larger. stranger, stickier. You're the human shape behind a century's worth of memory. An idea that still haunts our walls and our language, our politics and our romance. And the longer people look at you, the more versions of you they find. To some, you are the Iron Grandmother of the British Empire, a figurehead carved out of granite sitting stiff-backed through revolutions and railway openings, disapproving of anything too loud or too French. You represent duty, order, the crown as an anchor. To others, you're the hidden heart of a much messier age. You were not the builder of the empire, but the face on its seal, the one who signed off, nodded through, occasionally wept in private. You didn't march into colonies or drop bombs or steal land, but those who did it in your name. And when they needed legitimacy, they found it in you, in your silence, in your symbolism. That's the hard part to reconcile. You were both present and absent, powerful and powerless, always watching, but not always intervening. And to a growing number of people, particularly in the lands your empire once gripped by the throat, you are something else entirely. A symbol of what was taken, a reminder of what it meant to be ruled by someone who had never seen your shores or spoken your language. In classrooms across Lagos, Delhi, Kingston, Nairobi, people still debate what your reign left behind, not just in politics or borders, but in the psyche, the hierarchy, the heritage. You've become, in that way, a kind of mirror. People see themselves in you, what they've inherited, what they've lost, what they want to leave behind. You didn't ask for that, but then, no monarch really gets to choose what their legacy becomes. Once your history, your story is up for grabs. And yet, for all this weight, for all this imperial baggage, for all the scholarly arguments and late-night debates, you were always, at your core, a woman. That part, weirdly, gets lost the most. You were a teenager when they handed you a crown. You were barely educated in statecraft. You had to learn everything on the fly. You were bossed around by men in suits and robes and medals. You were in love, deeply, embarrassingly in love, with Albert, the man who taught you how to rule, how to manage, how to dream of something beyond ribbon cutting and hand waving. And when he died, the world watched you fall apart and then criticised you for it. You grieved harder than a queen was expected to. You withdrew. You wrote his name again and again in your diary like a spell you couldn't uncast. You wore black until your own final breath. People mocked it, called you morbid, self-indulgent. But grief was the one place where no one else could reign. It was yours, and in that, maybe more than anything else, you were truly human. And then there were your children, 9 of them, each more complicated than the last. You were not a perfect mother, let's be clear. You could be cold, dismissive, disappointed. You wrote about them like a headmistress marking report cards. But you also tried. You also cared. You also lived through the unbearable pain of outliving 3 of them. No monarch should have to bury a child. You buried 3. And let's not forget how bored you sometimes were. All those ceremonies, all those formalities. You wrote in your diary how the dinners dragged on, how the speeches felt like reheated porridge, how you longed just to walk in the garden or hear some honest laughter. You adored gossip but hated politics. You loved dogs more than some of your prime ministers. You were both terribly rigid and quietly rebellious. You hired people your court disapproved of, John Brown, the blunt, Highlander, who made you laugh when no one else could, and Abdul Karim, the Indian clerk who taught you language and tenderness after decades of ceremonial emptiness. Your court hated them. You didn't care. You never stopped missing them, even when their names were scrubbed from the official histories you remembered. That's the kind of monarch you were. Not flashy, not radical, but deeply stubborn. You kept the people you loved close, even when everyone else told you not to. You trusted your own judgment, even when it was lonely, and you ruled for 63 years, not by force, not by charisma, by staying. You saw the first photographs, the first electric lights, the first telephones. You lived long enough to see the world become something your father could never have imagined, and you left it still changing, still spinning faster than any crown could follow. And now, here we are, over a century later, still talking about you, still arguing over you, still naming things after you, still trying to figure out what kind of world you helped make and what we're supposed to do with it. Your empire is gone. That's the simple truth. The sun did set eventually. It's set with war, with rebellion, with negotiation, with sorrow and celebration and paperwork. But your impact remains, not in the iron grip of rule, but in the soft haunt of legacy, in the way people still flinch at certain words, still navigate borders you never walked, still remember your name without knowing the woman behind it. And maybe, in the end, that's the real triumph of your reign. Not the size of the empire, not the number of nations painted red, but the fact that you became unforgettable, not through speeches or victories, but through sheer presence. You stayed. You endured. You wore the weight of the world in black silk and still managed to smile for the occasional portrait. And now, finally you rest. The carriages have stopped. The crowds have quieted. The mourning veils have lifted, and the world somehow keeps spinning, still touched by the life you lived and the legend you left behind. So now, the lamps are low. The empire has faded. The story is told. You've walked through every corridor of Queen Victoria's life, from a shy teenager awakened at dawn to become sovereign, to the weary matriarch of a world on the brink of modernity. And what a journey it's been. Not just hers, but yours too. Because tonight, whether you came for the history or just needed something gentle to fall asleep to, you've drifted through palaces and protests, love letters and war telegrams, royal scandals and tea-stained maps of empire. You've met a woman who didn't seek greatness, but was thrust into it, who lost her heart but ruled anyway, who mourned privately and reigned publicly for over 6 decades. She was complicated, imperfect, unpredictably stubborn, human in ways that history often forgets to include. And that's what lingers now, not just the crown or the statues or the maps, but the small things, her handwriting, her silence at Albert's grave, the way she signed her letters VRI with a flourish she never quite believed she earned. The empire is gone, but echoes remain. In languages, in train tracks, in parliamentary systems, in the questions we still ask about power, responsibility, and what it really means to leave a legacy. Queen Victoria didn't change the world by accident. She changed it by enduring it. And in doing so, she left behind something far stranger and more lasting than an empire. A myth wrapped around a real woman, still quietly shaping the present from the past. So, exhale now. Let the noise of empire fade. Let the candlelight of old drawing rooms flicker out. You've earned your rest, just like she did.